Chapter 1426. Save King Yun quickly. Yun Yang's expression changed. What was wrong with Yun Xiaoyao? Was he in danger? What was the meaning of Tianxian Cliff? However, he did not pursue the matter further. Shui Wuyin, who was on the other end of the call, was so weak that he looked like he was about to die. Yun Yang could sense this all too well. After all, Yun Yang's current cultivation base had long surpassed the limits of this world. With a single thought, he had already sent a gust of spiritual force through the mystical connection between the nine heavens dictum and Shui Wuyin. Although it was only a gust of spiritual force, it was enough to keep Shui Wuyin's soul from being destroyed and his life intact. In the Tianxian continent, as long as the soul existed, it was not an incurable problem to Yun Yang, even if the physical body was damaged. Yun Yang's mental strength had also spread far and wide the moment the gust of spiritual force was sent out, confirming Shui Wuyin's location and understanding his situation. Shui Wuyin's current situation was not good. He was in a precarious situation and his life was at stake, but he still desperately wanted Yun Yang to save Yun Xiaoyao. How could Yun Yang not understand the meaning behind it? How could he not be shocked? Go to the family of generals, I'll go after you, Yun Yang instructed. With a flash, the space in front of him tore apart with a single thought, and he took a step out. Shangguan Lingxiu did the same. She sensed briefly, and tore the space apart as well, stepping into it. To both of them, it was too easy to find someone in this world. If it were not for the fact that this world was relatively low for both of them, it would not be able to withstand the air exhaled by their cultivation method, and they could move even faster. After all, with their current cultivation base, they could kill a saint or even a royal saint cultivator with just a breath. Tianxian Cliff. With a single thought, Yun Yang traveled 20,000 miles in an instant through the strange realm of space, arriving at Tianxian Mountain and the Temple of Nine Supremes. Looking around, he was stunned. There was no sign of Yun Xiaoyao's aura around. Not only around the Temple of Nine Supremes, there was no sign of him within 10,000 miles. There was no sign of Yun Xiaoyao in the capital, no sign of him within 10,000 miles of Tianxian Cliff or Ziyou. Where had Yun Xiaoyao gone? Yun Yang suddenly felt an indescribable fear growing from the bottom of his heart, difficult to suppress. With this thought in mind, Yun Yang no longer had any fear. His deific consciousness exploded to its limit, spreading it across the world. The 5 continents, the 4 seas, the sky, the earth, and the sea, searching everywhere he could. But still there was nothing. At this moment, there were still thousands of soldiers tearing down the Temple of Nine Supremes on Tianxian Cliff. The indiscriminate search allowed Yun Yang to sense traces of a battle at the edge of the forest hundreds of miles away. That place was actually one of the few places in this world that still had Yun Xiaoyao's aura. Yun Yang collapsed with a single step. He stared at the scarred hillside. The hillside was covered in countless dark red bloodstains and crisscrossing sword marks. Yun Yang studied the sword marks carefully, the murderous intent in his eyes no longer contained. He could sense that these were indeed marks left behind by Yun Xiaoyao's battle. Only Yun Xiaoyao's sword of delirium could emit such sword energy. Upon closer inspection, he could even faintly sense Yun Xiaoyao's sword energy and sword intent. With a lift of his wrist, the ground in front of him flipped over abruptly, neat and tidy. Dust and smoke actually did not rise. Looking again, there were still bloodstains. The battle earlier had probably been too brutal, as a large amount of blood had seeped more than 2 feet into the ground. Looking at this situation, at least 3,000 people must have been killed. Their blood must have been drained to cause such a result. Just by looking at the sword energy and the bloodstains, Yun Yang could completely imagine how brutal the battle had been here. It was a battle between one person and thousands of people. One person against thousands of martial artists with extraordinary cultivation base. Now both parties were nowhere to be seen. Yun Yang carefully searched every inch of the battlefield, ignoring the troops who were still destroying the Temple of Nine Supremes on Tianxian Cliff, not even sparing them a glance. To Yun Yang, Yun Xiaoyao's life and death were above everything else in this world. Even the Temple of Nine Supremes could not be bothered with him. This piece of cloth. Looking at the green cloth in the forest behind the hillside, Yun Yang frowned. Dong Tianling? Had he participated in this battle too? With a single thought, Yun Yang located Dong Tianling immediately by following the aura of the torn clothes. He realized that Dong Tianling was wrapped in bandages, and his eyes were filled with rage. Dong Tianling's grief and indignation had reached a boiling point as he cursed hysterically. Heal yourself quickly. Get me the best medicine. F*CK. I'll be in charge of the Dong family from now on. I'll fight it out with that Ned Yutong's little emperor. Your father doesn't want the family anymore. All of them F*King become assassins. Your father wants him to be the empire. King bird. Your father will kill them one by one. All the F*King officials of Yutong. Your father will kill them all. Let that child be a loner in name only. Leave the dog emperor alive, kill him last. Damn it. If others don't do it, your father will do it myself. After cursing, she burst into tears again. Uncle Yun. Sob sob sob. I will definitely avenge you. Just you wait. I'll send the entire empire of Yutong down to be buried with you. Sob sob sob. Every word was like a cuckoo weeping blood, sobbing uncontrollably. Boom. A domineering, murderous aura erupted without warning, shaking the heaven and earth. An unfathomable abyss appeared on the ground, thousands of miles long and 1,000 feet wide. Smoke and dust filled the air, blocking out the sun and the sky. Within thousands of miles, one could not even see their own fingers. Without exception, everyone within this area was shaken to the point of being thrown off their feet. All of them turned their heads to look in shock. In that instant, everyone felt a strong killing intent that they had never felt before. It was as if the entire world was about to be destroyed, and they could not even breathe. Their hearts stopped beating at that moment. When Yun Yang had heard Dong Tianling's words, his heart had palpitated, and he had lost his composure. His murderous intent had lost control and exploded. That moment of ignorance had almost caused the entire Tianxian continent to sink. Yun Yang was already at the pinnacle of the half-saint level, only a hair's breadth away from the realm of saint. His current cultivation base and ability had far exceeded the limit of Tianxian continent. He had to rein in his aura carefully at all times. Otherwise, a single thought, a single stray of mystical qi, could cause great damage to the continent with every movement. It was fortunate that Yun Yang had come to his senses in time just now, and had only created a huge canyon. If he had been a little late in retracting his attack, even if it was not an apocalypse, a portion of the continent would have sunk. Not too far away, Dong Tianling, whose cultivation base was far superior to the others, was especially sensitive to the change. For a moment, he felt the world shaking and the universe turning upside down. It was as if his soul had left his body. Then, his vision blurred and a purple-robed person was already standing in front of him. Dong Tianling tried his best to calm himself and looked up. Seeing the familiar gaze, he could not help exclaiming, "Boss? You're back." Yun Yang closed his eyes to suppress the raging anger within him and asked softly, "Little Lung, what is going on?" Dong Tianling bawled, "Boss, why are you only back now? Go save Uncle quickly." Yun Yang sighed softly, "I've gone to the battlefield to take a look. My father isn't there, there's no trace of him at all. What is going on? Tell me everything from the beginning." Dong Tianling gritted his teeth and said, "It's very simple. That little emperor was overweening in his desire to hold power. He was perverse and insane." As Dong Tianling spoke, Yun Yang's expression grew darker and darker. At the same time, he spread his deific consciousness to a radius of 10,000 miles, searching diligently, trying to find the remnant of Yun Xiaoyao's soul. According to the traces left behind in the battle, the chances of Yun Xiaoyao surviving by sheer luck were almost zero. However, Yun Yang had pinned his hopes on Yun Xiaoyao's profound cultivation base to preserve the remnant of his soul. Even if it was only a sliver of it, there was still hope for his soul to return and extend his life. However, Yun Yang had searched the entire radius of 10,000 miles again and again, but to no avail. During the search, Yun Yang had found many remnant souls that had been killed by Yun Xiaoyao. However, no matter how carefully Yun Yang searched, there was nothing more to be gained, only disappointment after disappointment. After another round of indiscriminate searching, Yun Yang was enraged. A gust of mental energy swept outwards, annihilating all the remnant souls, turning them into ashes and beyond redemption. Just like that, a gust of black smoke rose from a piece of land thousands of miles away. It was the last trace of countless remnant souls that had been annihilated at the same time. The soldiers of Tianxian Cliff who were 100 miles away suddenly felt chills run down their spines. It was as if countless souls were crying, begging, despairing, but they were eternally annihilated under an unparalleled force. Dong Tianlong did not know much about the 9 Supremes and the changes in the imperial court. After all, he only mentioned Lin Yunlong as a clue. The rest were mostly vague and hard to determine. As Yun Yang listened anxiously, he swept Dong Tianlong and the others up and chased after Qiu Yunsan and Chun Wanfeng. Then with a gust of wind, they suddenly went to the Qiu family's old home. Since Qiu Jianhan had gone into seclusion, he had been hiding in a small, secluded courtyard deep within the Qiu family's old home. He looked gloomy all day long, his anger slowly fading away. On this day, he had just taken out his goblet and poured himself some fine wine. But his eyes were glued to the goblet, unable to drink it no matter what. It was like a fishbone stuck in his throat. At this moment, these 4 words were no longer an idiom, but a real feeling. His throat seemed to be blocked tightly. Even when the fine wine was right in front of him, there was no room for it to enter his throat. Old Marshal Qiu heaved a long sigh and murmured to himself, "How did it come to this? How did it come to this?" Ever since he had returned to his old home, he had mumbled this to himself no less than 10,000 times. Not even in his wildest dreams would he have thought that things would come to this. How did it come to this day, one step at a time? He recalled the intelligent child who had grown into an adult step by step, transforming step by step into the heir to the imperial court, and now, ascending to the throne. It was not that everyone had not felt it since the beginning, that this child had a strong desire for power, a desire to control that far exceeded that of an ordinary person. However, that was one of the traits of a ruler, so it was not strange at all. However, as the world changed, how had it come to such a perverse and insane state? Why is this happening? Qiu Jianhan frowned at the goblet, unable to figure it out. "Old Marshal," a familiar and friendly voice that he had not heard for a long time rang out. Qiu Jianhan lifted his head abruptly, looking lost as if he was dreaming. "Am I dreaming again?" This was because this voice had appeared in his midnight dreams too many times. However, when he woke up from the joy, there was only disappointment. At this moment, a purple silhouette stood before him. It was a handsome face that he had not seen for a long time, real and genuine. "Old Marshal, you're not dreaming. I'm back." Qiu Jianhan looked at Yun Yang in a daze, still in disbelief. He extended his hand and touched Yun Yang's face shakily, his expression changing from confusion to shock. Then, he abruptly retracted his hand and covered his face with both hands, bawling loudly. "You're finally back. But why are you only back now? Why didn't you come back earlier?" The old marshal covered his face, crying his heart out. Droplets of tears seeped through the gaps between his fingers and dripped onto the ground, drenching it instantly. In the time it took to drink a cup of tea, the small yard that Qiu Jianhan stayed in was filled with people. The Qiu family had turned the internal martial arts hall into a banquet hall to receive the guests who had suddenly arrived. In the time it took to drink a cup of tea, Yun Yang had gone back and forth a few times, bringing Leng Daoyin, Taizheng, and the others here. Old Mistress Shengguan had also come along with Shengguan Lingxiu. The heroes who had created Yutong and pacified the world had gathered once again, but they could not help but sigh. Everyone had a belly full of bitterness and confusion. Old Marshal Qiu took the lead and recounted everything that had happened during this period of time in detail, sighing as he spoke. When he talked about the old emperor's passing, everyone, including Yun Yang, felt a wave of sadness. His Majesty was still very healthy when I left. I dare not say much, but he should be fine for at least 10 to 20 years. How did he suddenly become like this? Yun Yang was puzzled. The dead are gone. His Majesty is gone. How is King Yun? Is he safe? The crowd asked in unison. I'm still searching. Yin Yang's expression grew darker. The mention of the dead being gone had obviously tugged at Yun Yang's heartstrings again. Yun Yang's deific consciousness was still searching. He did not slack off for even a moment, expanding the search area further. His deific consciousness stretched far and wide, covering all the lands within 30,000 miles of Tianxian Cliff, including the mountains and swamps. Even the most secluded caves and underground caverns had been searched. In the process of searching, he had even found many ancient tombs of previous generations. In spite of this, Yun Xiaoyao seemed to have vanished from this world. The battle had only happened yesterday, but there were no more traces left behind. If he was alive, he could not be found. If he was dead, his corpse could not be found. What surprised Yun Yang the most was that Yun Xiaoyao was nowhere to be found. Dong Tianling had mentioned that those who had besieged Yun Xiaoyao were nowhere to be found as well. With Yun Xiaoyao's state at the time, it was impossible for him to have killed all of them. Even if he had gone to the extremes of self-destruction, he could not have erased all traces. All in all, something was not right. Something was terribly wrong. Furthermore, Yun Yang could vaguely feel that everything that was happening now was sinister. How old was Yu Qingkuan? Even if he was born with the root of evil, heartless, and insane, there was no reason for him to become so evil and extreme in such a short period of time. What he had done was basically breaking his own wings and destroying his own foundation. How could this be the behavior of a qualified emperor? The old emperor's death was also a mystery that was shrouded in mystery. Some of Yun Yang's questions seemed to have been answered after listening to what the crowd had to say, but there were more that he did not understand and could not understand. Lord Supreme Cloud, what do you plan to do when you reappear in this world? Taizheng asked. Taizheng's eyes were ablaze with rage. It was the flame of hatred. The unrivaled marshal of the world was burning with rage. If he were to allow this rage to be unleashed, Yun Yang believed that it would be a calamity for the world, and the people would be plunged into misery. With Taizheng's current reputation, and the military capability that he had retired from, it was not a difficult task to gather a force to fight against Yutong. To put it bluntly, these people here did not even need Yun Yang to do anything when they joined forces. They alone could plunge Tianxian continent into the flames of war and bring it back to chaos. It was even possible to overthrow Yutong's rule. However, the more Yun Yang thought about this world, the more confused he became. He could vaguely feel that there was a dark hand behind the current changes. Perhaps the world being torn apart and returning to chaos was the other party's true intention. There's something wrong with this. Yun Yang subconsciously looked at the people around him. Fang Qingtian, the Shangguan family of generals, Qiu Jianhan, Leng Daoyin, Sun Zihu, Fu Baogua, Taizheng, and so on, including the steel-faced man Wu Lai. These people were all important officials of Yutong, important officials, loyal to the end of their lives. The more Yun Yang looked, the more he felt that something was amiss. It was not because of anything else, but because the people were too complete. Not a single one of them had died. This was not right. Yun Yang asked slowly amidst the heavy atmosphere. Taizheng, you escaped on your own. How many of your central generals, trusted assistant generals, personal guards, including your family warriors, your family, your kin, how many of them came out? Taizheng was taken aback and said, all of them. Yun Yang frowned and asked, how many of them exactly? Not a single one of them was injured. Taizheng thought about it and said, the total number of people is probably more than 5,000. Our escape that day was very smooth. Not a single one of us was injured. It's just that some of them were injured in the pursuit. Yun Yang was taken aback, turning to look at Fang Qingtian. Fang Qingtian said in a decrepit manner, this old man's disciples, 8 of them are still alive. 7 of them came out with us. Their kin have passed away. Not a single one of them was injured. Adding the disciples' kin, soldiers, and confidants, there's a total of more than 14,000 people. After Fang Qingtian said this, he immediately fell into deep thought. As the saying went, one would know the meaning of the melody. As an old minister of 4 dynasties and the current chancellor, he could instantly sense that something was amiss from Yun Yang's question. Qiu Jianhan was the same, his face pale as he said in a trembling voice, this old man's disciples and subordinates, they came out with us. A total of more than 6,000. They're all fine now. There are 6,000 people in the Shangguan family of generals. 5,000 of them are family warriors, and quite a number of brothers from the military. Not a single one of them was injured. Old Mistress Shangguan said in a low voice. Wu Lai's gaze was completely blank as he said, I brought my family and 4 to 5 disciples, including the maids and guards. There were less than 100 people. Lung Douyin was speechless. Fu Baoguo was speechless. Sun Zihu. Everyone looked at each other. They were the cream of the crop, the cream of the crop. It would be strange if they did not realize that something was amiss by now. Something was wrong. Something was terribly wrong. Yes, why wasn't a single one of them dead? Feng Lingtian said. I'm scared of all of you. I've spent so much effort to dig a hole, and I was so pleased that I managed to trap all of you. But I didn't expect it to be so serious. F***CK, so many of you are cursing my mother now. I'm scared to death. I wanted to reveal it in a few days, but now it seems that I'm scared of all of you. Give me a timeline in advance, or else I'm afraid that all of you will riot. This is the most successful hole I've ever dug. It's a pity that I can't withstand your pressure. It's a pity. Also, there's 1 chapter a day now, but 1 chapter is 4,000 words. In a month, there are at least 10 times where it's 7 to 8,000 words, and quite a number of times where it's 5 to 6,000 words. When it's 4,000 words, it only takes up half of it. Why is there such a huge grudge? Do you have to split more than 10,000 words into 5 or 6 chapters to see the outburst? Chapter 1427. When they were in the capital, everyone was disheartened, but due to their different positions, their final decision to leave, and the timing of their departure were different as well. It was inevitable that they were scattered. There were times when 3 to 5 of them gathered together to vent their frustrations and discuss, but because they were in the middle of it all, they were blinded by a single leaf and did not think deeper. They did not consider this aspect either. After all, they had watched their courageous colleagues resign one by one. There was only chilliness, confusion, anger, and resentment that rose in their hearts. Now that everyone had gathered in one place, especially when they heard Yin Yang's shocking words, they felt that something was amiss. This wasn't just a normal problem, it was a huge problem. Yin Yang said with a frown. Have you noticed? Other than all of you here, there are 7 to 8 civil officials among the officials who have resigned. There are also veterans who have served for several dynasties. Although they didn't come here, I've already found out their current locations. They're all safe and sound, and they have a certain level of capability in their hands. If all of you were to gather together, it would almost be a complete, functioning Yutong's small imperial court, and you're all capable generals who can take on 10 men at once. There are experienced strategists, those who can charge and break through enemy lines, behead generals and seize flags. There are talented commanders and generals. There are also many gods of war and gods of war. Your personal guards are the strongest fighting force under your command. There are those who are good at internal politics, those who are good at justice, and those who are good at civil politics. To put it simply, as long as the civil officials are slightly expanded, it's a piece of cake to build a complete imperial court. The military generals are so complete that they're practically redundant. As long as new recruits are recruited, and your personal guards are dispatched, they'll be trained for a period of time, and after a few battles, they'll be a military force that's good at war. Yin Yang frowned and said, the only thing you're lacking is a territory that can be used. However, to people like you, how can a mere territory, a base, be it a difficult task? Just find a territory that is guarded by an old friend, and it doesn't matter if it's through emotion or coercion. It's easy to take over a few cities. With this as a foundation, and with a period of consolidation, the foundation will be complete, and it'll be a piece of cake for you to build a country. If you are given a few more years, it will not be impossible for you to develop your territory into a relatively large territory of the Imperium. Then, if the royal family is really perverse and insane, why don't they exterminate all of you? Instead, he allowed all of you to resign and leave safely. Aren't you afraid that all of you will gather together and rebel? Even the most benevolent ruler would not do such a stupid thing. Not to mention a cruel and heartless ruler in your eyes. Yun Yang frowned. There's something sinister about this. Something's not right. Fang Qingtian and the others looked at each other. No one would have noticed this if they had not gathered together. Now that they had gathered and summed up their respective strengths, all of them, like Yun Yang, felt that something was amiss. This was not just amiss. Fang Qingtian's eyebrows were quivering as he said shakily. Could it be that someone has deliberately facilitated this? This is equivalent to moving the imperial court's core forces completely out of the imperial court? Once the words left his mouth, the entire hall was silent. Qiu Jianhan's beard was quivering violently. Everyone's eyes were rimmed with tears. Deliberately facilitated this? Yes. This must have been done deliberately to facilitate the current situation. Otherwise, as Yun Yang had said, even the most benevolent ruler would never have allowed such a huge force of elites to gather together and release them all into the forest. What was more, this was the cruel, perverse, and tyrannical little emperor that these people were talking about. No matter how foolish he was, he would not do this, would he? When these forces were gathered in one place, it was a super bomb that could blow up the entire continent several times over. Tai Zheng's voice was trembling as he said, This isn't right. After I left, I've been hunted down many times. If it was intentional, Qiu Jianhan's face was pale as he said, the so-called hunts that you've encountered, how many were the losses? Tai Zheng was stunned as he murmured, there were almost 6,000 men under me, and we've been through 7 to 8 rounds of hunting. The battle was dangerous but not intense. All of them managed to escape, but the losses amounted to more than 700 men. He was the first to suck in a cold breath after he finished speaking. More than 700 men? Qiu Jianhan seemed to have seen through everything as he said coldly. As a traitor to the country, Yutong has spread the news to the world that they've sent the nation's elites to hunt you down. After 7 to 8 rounds of hunting, you've lost more than 700 men? However, the force that was pursuing us was obviously a grand one. We've killed tens of thousands of pursuers when we broke out of the siege. If this is an act... Tai Zheng's voice grew softer as he spoke until it finally fell silent. As one of the famous generals of this era, he had already noticed that something was amiss. He had lost less than 1,000 men in the 7 to 8 rounds, but he had killed more than 10,000 of the enemy. Was he being hunted down? Who was being hunted down? Qiu Jianhan, Leng Douyin, and Fang Qingtian were suddenly tearing up. Your Majesty, what are you planning? Why is this happening? The three of them bawled, tears and mucus streaming down their cheeks as they wailed. Old Mistress Shengguan's eyes were rimmed red as well as she murmured, this doesn't seem like banishment or torture. It's more like deliberate protection. To allow us to leave that troublesome place where we could lose our lives at any time. To preserve our strength for the future. Pain was written all over Fu Baogui's square face. Before this, we were filled with indignation and indignation. Now that I think about it, many things have been foreshadowed. Think about it. If we were still in the imperial court and saw the changes, we would have been enraged and offended God. If we were to ride a tiger, even if His Majesty had the intention to be biased, he would have been forced to kill us. Sun Zihu frowned. I arranged the assassination myself, faked my death to escape. There wasn't any in-depth investigation, and the case was closed so easily. Yun Yang frowned and said, that's exactly what happened. That's why there were signs of everything. It's just that everyone was blinded by it, and only noticed it now. Everyone's hearts were heavy with worry. Your Majesty, what are you doing? What kind of pressure have you been under? Why did you make such a decision? Why didn't you tell us the reason, and let us bear the burden together? As officials, shouldn't we share the Emperor's burden? However, the Emperor of the Empire of Yutong, who had been slumbering beneath the earth, would never be able to tell them personally about this reason. He was already lying alone in the dark tomb. Even until his death, he did not say a single word to anyone. Thinking deeper, with the current situation, I'm afraid His Majesty isn't the only one who can execute this plan. After all, His Majesty has given up all the authority back then. At the very least, this plan needs the cooperation of another person, and the other person can only be. Yin Yang's eyes glinted. The other person can only be the current young emperor, Yu Qianquan. Only when the two of them work together can they form the current situation. If it's just His Majesty alone, it's impossible. There's a limit to a person's strength. It's impossible to be like this, with fewer mistakes and accidents. Yin Yang exhaled a long breath, a hint of relief flashing across his eyes. When he had just returned to the Tianxian land, especially when he learned that his father, Yin Xiaoyao, might have met with misfortune, he almost wanted to rush into the palace and tear the little thing that he had brought back into pieces and grind his bones into ashes. Now, however, he was extremely thankful that he had not done so, that he had not been so impulsive. There were too many mysteries in this. Qiu Jianhan sucked in a deep breath and said, "There must be a great deal of internal difficulties hidden in this matter. The risk of danger is even greater, and there's always the risk of death. That's why His Majesty didn't dare let us know, afraid that we'd be prematurely killed. Both he and the crown heir must be under tremendous pressure. Now that His Majesty has passed away, the pressure has fallen on the young emperor alone." Qiu Jianhan said solemnly, "I think there must be a huge mastermind behind this. The danger is unimaginable, an unprecedented one. It's a danger that we can't handle even if we work together. If there's such a hidden danger, the mastermind must be an expert even more terrifying than Yun Xiaoyao, secretly controlling the palace, His Majesty and the crown heir." Before His Majesty left, he entered the residence of King Xiaoyao many times. "I'm afraid he's hesitating, or perhaps he's trying to confirm when you'll return. Perhaps, in His Majesty's eyes, the only thing that can solve this predicament is Supreme Cloud's return. That's why he's been hoping he's been. The reason why he hasn't told the truth to King Xiaoyao is probably because he knows very well that King Xiaoyao doesn't have the ability to handle this matter. If he acts rashly, not only will he startle the enemy, he'll also lose King Yun's life." Qiu Jianhan's tears streamed down his cheeks as he looked out the window. Suddenly, he knelt down softly and cried out sorrowfully, "Your Majesty! Your Majesty!" All of Yutong's civil and military officials were weeping silently, tears and snot streaming down their cheeks. In his lifetime, the emperor who ruled over the 4 seas and brought peace to the world suddenly encountered a great crisis. When he knew that he was unable to deal with it, the first thing he thought of was to protect the country. Then, he made many arrangements and banished all the important officials to preserve the seed of hope. There was no reason to create a reason, even if it caused the officials and subordinates to lose hope. As long as they were safe, it was enough. At a time when no one could understand, he had used such a method to protect Yutong's team and the seed of hope. Wait for the right moment. Wait for the right moment to turn. Yin Yang squinted and said faintly, "A great crisis is for sure, and it's also for sure that all of you will be protected. However, this emperor of ours only wants to protect all of you. The people he's chosen to sacrifice have been chosen long ago." "Who?" "My father, Yin Xiaoyao," Yin Yang said calmly. The group was silent. Yin Yang's answer was unexpected, but it was within reason. Perhaps it was not within reason, but it was within expectations. By now this matter had basically been thoroughly understood. Only the return of Supreme Cloud could solve it in this world. However, Supreme Cloud had already ascended to the upper realm, and did not know what was happening here. How could he return? Therefore, the first thing the Empire of Yutong did was to burn down the 9 Supremes' temples and slander Supreme Cloud as much as possible, causing the legendary miracles of the 9 Supremes to vanish completely. If Supreme Cloud had become a god, he would definitely have felt that the power of prayers in the human realm was gone. There must be a reason why it had gone from its peak to nothing. Then, Supreme Cloud would have come back to see what was going on. However, when he realized that this method was useless, ineffective, and meaningless, he could only resort to another method. Blood police. Yin Yang's eyes glinted. At this moment, the feelings he felt were extremely complicated. He did not know what kind of attitude he should use to face Yutong's emperor. He had chosen to sacrifice his younger brother, his biological younger brother. Yun Xiaoyao and Supreme Cloud were only father and son in name. Despite their deep bond, they were not biological father and son after all. If something were to happen to Yun Xiaoyao, and he suddenly died. Supreme Cloud might not be able to sense it based on their blood relationship. However, His Majesty the Emperor had still chosen him, and used the most extreme method. Qiu Jianhan, Fang Qingtian, and the others were quick to react to this point after a slight pause. However, they did not speak. They did not know what to say or how to say it. The Emperor's decisiveness was undoubtedly the best in the world, but his ruthless decision at the critical moment was also heart-wrenching and frightening. Yun Xiaoyao was the person that the Yutong royalty felt the most guilty towards, the person that they owed the most. He was also His Majesty the Emperor's only remaining blood brother in this world. However, His Majesty the Emperor had still done it. For the sake of a slim hope, he had placed the most lethal trap on his biological younger brother. If my father had died and I still hadn't felt it, there would definitely be more people sacrificing themselves. They would continue to be sacrificed until I felt it, or perhaps everyone was dead. Yin Yang heaved a long sigh. If I'm not mistaken, Bai Yixue and Fang Mafei would have fallen into the royal family's hands long ago. Perhaps they're already dead. Qiu Jianhan and the others remained silent in response to this deduction. Facing such a monarch, they did not say a single negative thought. However, facing the victim, Yun Yang, they had nothing to say. After all, the emperor's practical method was to sacrifice his reputation, his father, and his brother. If I can come down in the end, this matter can be resolved and all of you can return naturally. If I can't come down in the end, then with your powers, as long as you understand one day, it won't be difficult for you to rebuild the world and build another empire. Yin Yang exhaled softly. The emperor, who was already in his eternal slumber, had actually thought so far ahead in this desperate situation. Dong Tianling's gaze suddenly brightened as he said, "If that's the case, then Xia Bingchuan's betrayal is fake? Is he also someone in the know? Is he bearing the humiliation and cooperating with the operation?" Yin Yang said coldly, "No, he's not. He can't possibly know. He's no longer one of us." Dong Tianling lowered his head in disappointment. Qiu Yunsan and the others were dejected as well. If it were possible, they would rather believe that there was a slim chance that Xia Bingchuan was someone in the know, someone who was thinking for the bigger picture. If that was the case, they would not feel so terrible. However, just like what Yin Yang had said, Xia Bingchuan was no longer one of them. "I want to make a trip to Tiantang City," Yin Yang said softly. Qiu Jianhan looked at him pleadingly and said faintly, "Yin Yang, you must not be impulsive. His Majesty has put so much effort into this. He has placed all his hopes on you." Yin Yang sucked in a deep breath and said, "I will solve this once and for all as His Majesty wishes." The group was delighted. However, Yin Yang continued, "But if my father is really gone?" He looked out the window at the fluttering white clouds and murmured, "This heaven and earth, this human realm, has no meaning to me anymore. All of you can just wait to rebuild the world." Feng Lingtian said, "I finished writing early today. I'm thinking about how to proceed." Chapter 1428. A moment later, Yun Yang passed by the Xia family residence and heard that the Xia family leader was arranging for experts to head to Tiantang City to capture and kill Mei Wenjian. Xia Bingchuan, on the other hand, was meditating in the family's secret chamber. His face was filled with anxiety, indicating that he could not calm down at all. Yin Yang had nowhere to vent his raging anger. As he thought about it, his mental strength that had always been restrained and gentle turned violent. The power that could be unleashed under the laws of the world blew through the Xia family like a gale. In the blink of an eye, every single adult male in the Xia family, including Xia Bingchuan, had no time to realize what was happening. In the blink of an eye, their souls had been dispersed and they were all dead. The next moment, the overbearing mental strength guided their souls, causing all the adult men of the Xia family outside to perish one after another. The Xia family was erased from the world. As his cultivation base grew and his power grew, Yun Yang was increasingly reminded of Aunt May's words that day. Ascending to the heavens and diving into the earth, moving mountains and filling seas, was but a walk in the park. A single breath could destroy the sun, moon, and stars. With a single thought, the world would sink with it. Only then could one see the best of the best. Now, he did not even have to lift a finger. With a mere thought, several families in this world had been wiped out in the blink of an eye. The higher one's cultivation base, the more one would understand the vastness of the world. The stronger one's ability, the more one would know that there was always someone better out there. As for Xia Bingchuan, after Yun Yang had confirmed his crimes, he felt disgusted to even see him again. Thus he had killed him as well. The beauty of the past was gone with the wind. I don't know what reason you have, what difficulties you have. I know that you must have your reasons. All kinds of helplessness, and all kinds of bitterness. But I don't want to listen. I don't want to understand. I don't want to forgive. Whatever the reason, it's done, it's done. The capital. In a dark underground chamber. This was probably not a secret chamber anymore. It would be more appropriate to call it an underground river. There used to be a secret room above, but it had already collapsed. Underneath the secret room, there was a tunnel that went down thousands of feet. Now, it had been completely buried along with the collapse of the secret room. 10,000 feet down, there was an underground river that flowed endlessly. A hole had been dug under the water level of the underground river, and it curved upwards to form another small cave. And Shui Wuyin was hiding here. This was the final path of retreat that Shui Wuyin had prepared for himself. If there was a strong enemy, he would quickly enter the secret room and detonate it before the enemy found the secret room. His substitute in the secret room would not only be killed by the explosion, but he would also use the force of the explosion to open the entrance of the secret passage, causing him to fall all the way. At the same time, the arrangements above would take effect, and with the continuous explosion and collapse, all traces would be erased. Until he fell into the underground river, the 10,000 zhang passageway above would be completely blocked, leaving no traces behind. Once he entered the underground river, he would still have the strength to spare. He would be able to follow the flow of the river for a few hundred feet, then enter the cave entrance from the water, and quickly move into the cave. That way he would be safe. Shui Wuyin was confident that even an immortal would not be able to discover him from such a setup. Of course, if someone could track him down, then that was his fate. What else could he do if he didn't accept his fate? Up until now, Shui Wuyin had been in this underground river for a year and a half without any sun. Previously, the Nine Heavens dictum had suddenly sent out a message, reviving Shui Wuyin's almost hopeless heart. The surge of spiritual force had even revived Shui Wuyin. Even so, Shui Wuyin still thought that he was dreaming when he saw Yin Yang appear before him in real life. When Yin Yang saw Shui Wuyin again, even he dared not believe that the person before him was actually Shui Wuyin himself. The previous contact with his deific consciousness had been made with the help of the Nine Heavens dictum's mystical power. It was already remarkable that Yin Yang could confirm that Shui Wuyin was still alive and send a surge of qi of spiritual force over. But he had not actually seen Shui Wuyin's current state. If he had known about Shui Wuyin's condition, Yin Yang would have rushed over to save him at once. The current Shui Wuyin no longer looked like a human. He did not look like a human, not in the usual sense of being withered, and no longer looking like a human. Instead, his limbs were truly incomplete. Both his legs, including his spine, were completely shattered and hung limply on his body. They were even starting to stink. His calf bones were completely exposed due to the rotting grayish color of his bones. His toes had long rotted away. It was a ghastly sight that chilled one's heart. Yin Yang was shocked to see Shui Wuyin's condition. You can still survive in this state. Previously, Yin Yang had been overly anxious about Yun Xiaoyao's safety. It was also because Shui Wuyin did not ask for his help that he had subconsciously judged that Shui Wuyin might be injured. His condition was not good, but it was not too bad and he could still hold on. That was why he had only sent a surge of qi of spiritual force and did not rescue him personally. Who would have thought that Shui Wuyin's condition would be so bleak? At least, from Yin Yang's point of view, it was not surprising that Shui Wuyin would be finished the very next moment. Shui Wuyin's eyes were glinting with extreme hatred. If I didn't want revenge, if I didn't want to wait for you, I would have killed myself long ago. I've heard your message earlier. Asking you to rescue King Yun is the top priority. I think I can still fight for a period of time. There are priorities. I'm very curious. What do you do for a living? Yun Yang lamented over Shui Wuyin's bleak condition, but he was also surprised that Shui Wuyin could fight for his life like this. Shui Wuyin chuckled bitterly and plucked a piece of rotting flesh from his leg. Holding it in his hand, he crawled to the entrance of the cave and dived deep into the water. After a while, he suddenly exerted force with his right hand. Water splashed everywhere as a fish the size of a palm was caught by Shui Wuyin. Stuffing the lively fish into his mouth, Shui Wuyin opened his mouth and chewed on it, looking at Yun Yang with his ashen eyes. What do you think? If one doesn't want to die, he will always find a way to live. Even with Yun Yang's monochromatic appearance, he could not help but shudder at the sight. He was actually fishing with his own flesh, Shui Wuyin said miserably. Many of my bones are broken, but my meridians are intact. Even if I don't heal myself every day, I'll clear my meridians to ensure that there's still a little bit of vitality left in my lower body. Otherwise, I wouldn't have any flesh left to fish with. The corners of Yin Yang's lips twitched again. I have at most 3 months. If you don't come, my flesh will completely rot. At that time, I can only use the flesh of my left hand to fish. If you don't return in half a year, I can only rot here. Shui Wuyin chuckled. Luckily you're here now. It's not too late. Yin Yang sucked in a breath, almost choking on the stench. Where's the 9 heavens dictum? Shui Wuyin retched and the 9 heavens dictum came out of his throat. He spat it into his hand and actually laughed happily. I'm counting on this thing to move and save my life. How could I just leave it there casually? Yin Yang retched again and passed a medicinal pill to Shui Wuyin while covering his nose. Wuyin, I've rarely submitted to anyone in my life. This time I submit to you. Eat it quickly. It was only half a day later. Shui Wuyin, who had fully recovered his body and legs, dived into the underground river impatiently. As he bathed, he cursed incessantly. Mother **cur, I'm a germaphobe this 1.5 years. Yin Yang was cramping all over. Germaphobe? This fellow actually had germaphobe. A person who claimed to be a germaphobe had struggled to survive for a 1.5 years in such an environment. The word submit is not enough to express my respect for you. I submit twice. Yin Yang sighed continuously. When Shui Wuyin was done scrubbing himself, he hopped up naked and circulated his cultivation to evaporate the water vapor. He looked at his own body lovingly, touching here and there. Suddenly, he cried out in agony, Lord Supreme Cloud, give me another pill. My mouth hasn't grown yet. Puffed. Yin Yang spluttered. It looked like 2 words of admiration were not enough. He had to add at least 3 words of admiration, 3 times of sincere admiration, and complete submission. Looking at Shui Wuyin's unprecedentedly pale face, Yin Yang hurriedly gave him another spiritual pill, along with a gust of air of vitality, to help him strengthen his foundation and increase his vigor. It only took a moment for Shui Wuyin to regain his male body completely. It was probably Shui Wuyin who was praising his new body. What he was praising was not his own body, but Yin Yang's ability to bring the dead back to life. It was much more powerful than the legendary method of resurrecting a person from the dead. How could there be such a godly skill in this world? How magical! Shui Wuyin exclaimed. Is this the so-called godly skill? Looks like Lord Supreme Cloud has gained a lot from ascending to the world of immortals. Yin Yang chuckled and said, You're too naive. How is this a divine trick? It's just a few medicinal pills and some arcane skills. As one's cultivation base gets higher, so will one's insight and knowledge. How about it? Do you still insist on staying in this worldly realm? Or do you insist on not working hard in your cultivation to transcend? Shui Wuyin was silent for a moment before replying in a low voice, Yes. Yin Yang shook his head with a bitter smile. Everyone had their own aspirations. No one could force anyone to do anything. He had long known Shui Wuyin's temper, but he still wanted to try. After all, Shui Wuyin was not only his right-hand man, but also his 8th brother's best friend. It would be perfect if he could meet his 8th brother again, with Shui Wuyin by his side. Shui Wuyin was not in a hurry to narrate the many changes that had taken place during this period of time. Instead, he helped Yin Yang analyze Yun Xiaoyao's situation. What kind of person was Shui Wuyin? Yun Yang did not explain Yun Xiaoyao's situation immediately, which meant that he had yet to locate Yun Xiaoyao's whereabouts. With Yun Yang's current cultivation base and ability, if he did not have some thoughts, he could easily destroy the world. Boss, from what I see, it's good news that there's no news of the old prince. He shouldn't have met with misfortune, Shui Wuyin said seriously. According to Boss, the enemies who besieged him have all disappeared, including the old prince. This situation is too strange. It doesn't look like he's been killed, but more like he's met with some powerful help and has been rescued. Yin Yang frowned and said, I've thought about this before, but there's a limited number of people with a profound cultivation base in this world. There's hardly anyone who has such an ability, and it's even more difficult to do it without leaving a single trace that even I can't find. From Dong Tianling's description, Yun Yang had a considerable understanding of the level of the people who besieged him that day. It was not an easy task for the cultivators of this world to rescue someone from the hands of 2,000 experts. Even if someone could do it, it would be difficult for them to do it without leaving any trace, to the point where Yin Yang would not be able to detect them. There's a reason for everything in this world, and there's a reason for it. Since there's something fishy about the battlefield that day, there must be another force involved. This is already a conclusion. Boss has a very high opinion of the person involved. Why don't we put ourselves in the shoes of the pinnacle cultivators who are kind to us in this world? For example, after Boss and Miss Lingxi ascended, the unrivaled swordsman, Jun Moyan, Shui Wuyin said, does he have the ability to do it? The unrivaled swordsman of the past, Jun Moyan, a name that had not been heard for a long time. Yin Yang thought about it and said, your analysis is right. If Jun Moyan had intervened at that time and lent a helping hand, he could have done it. However, the main point now is that I didn't find any trace of a third party at the scene. With my current level, there are very few people who can hide their traces, whether he's here or not. Yin Yang frowned and said, besides, I'm afraid our relationship with Jun Moyan hasn't reached that stage yet. After all, helping my father is equivalent to going against the highest ruler of the Empire of Yutong. Jun Moyan might not be so kind. Sai, I understand what you said earlier about no news being good news. I'm just worried that Dong Tianling has said that the poison in father's body is exceptionally potent. Ordinary people can't cure it at all. That's the real threat. Yin Yang frowned, his heart heavy with worry. Shui Wuyin nodded and said, then has Boss considered the possibility that there's someone from beyond the heavens who has intervened in this battle? Someone like Boss, or someone even stronger than Boss, who has taken King Yin away? Yin Yang sighed softly. Yun Xiaoyao was not dead. Yin Yang had long sensed this. If he had really been killed, it was impossible that he could not find his soul fragments. Such a method might be inconceivable and unimaginable to others, but to Yin Yang now, it was a piece of cake. But who is the person who has saved him? Yin Yang was most worried about this. I really can't imagine anyone in this world who can avoid my detection and leave no trace behind. Indeed, this was the strangest thing that had ever happened. With Yin Yang's current detection ability, it was already unbelievable that he could not find a single person's whereabouts in the Tianxian continent. Could it be that it was as Shui Wuyin had said, that there was another expert who had intervened, someone who was on par with him, or someone even stronger than him? Boss, don't worry. I'll still say the same thing, no news is good news. If the person who has saved old King Yun has good intentions, he will naturally be allowed to return. If he has bad intentions, then this person's target can only be you, Boss. He will come to you sooner or later. Shui Wuyin said, since it's confirmed that King Yun's life is not in danger now, it's already a great thing. You can be at ease now. Yin Yang thought about it, and realized that what Shui Wuyin said made sense. It was not that Yin Yang had not thought of this at first, but as the saying went, concern made one confused. Yun Xiaoyao meant too much to Yin Yang, which was why he had gone through so much trouble to search again and again, even though he knew that it would be fruitless. Now it was just as Shui Wuyin had said, it was best to deal with the changes by staying the same. As the two men analyzed the situation, Yun Yang's anxious heart slowly calmed down. Tell us then, Wuyin, What's going on here? It's a long story. It can't be explained in just a few words. Shui Wuyin sighed softly. After you left, I've been thinking of handing over a portion of the power outside of the Nine Heavens Dictum's core, which is the part that doesn't come into contact with the Nine Heavens Dictum's martial power, to the royal family. After all, it was the Nine Heavens Dictum who first came into contact with Yu Qianquan. His understanding of the Nine Heavens Dictum is even higher than His Majesty's. As long as the handover goes smoothly, at least on the surface, the Nine Heavens Dictum's power will all belong to the royal family. Without the backing of a powerful martial force, the Nine Heavens Dictum will definitely lose its original prestige, and the higher-ups will no longer have much interest in this organization. This way, the remaining core power of the Nine Heavens Dictum, which is the intelligence department, can be preserved, and it can once again turn from light to dark, completely hiding in the martial world, and becoming the emperor of the underworld. This is what you solemnly reminded me of before you left. Such a powerful force, one that's known to the royal family. Even if it's all hidden in the dark, without making a sound or move, no one can be at ease. Therefore, I've shrunk the Nine Heavens Dictum's power a few years ago, and even separated a portion of the martial force. I've also abandoned the relatively less important manpower that I'm not confident in, even if it's the slightest bit suspicious. At the same time, I've expanded my tentacles across the entire continent to build an even larger intelligence network. A year and a half ago, my actions have finally borne fruit. The Nine Heavens Dictum's core forces are all hidden in the dark. There's nothing that can dig us out. At the same time, I've vaguely sensed that the royal family's movements have become muddle-headed. It's not entirely appropriate to say that the royal family is muddle-headed. It should be said that there's some force that has infiltrated the royal family's forces. The hidden force is very powerful. At least, the royal family's combat power on the surface is completely unable to withstand it. Moreover, the outside world has been spreading rumors for quite a period of time, tarnishing the Nine Heavens' reputation and tearing down the Nine Heavens temples. This matter infuriated me. So, I contacted His Majesty through a spy. The first purpose of contacting them was naturally to confirm if there was any power acting in the dark. Was the royal family being threatened? I want to verify this matter, so that it'll be convenient for my future actions. Furthermore, there was no lack of probing. If the people of the royal family were so guarded against the Nine Supremes, and had mobilized the entire world to slander them, then what was their attitude towards the forces left behind by the Nine Supremes? Lastly, it's His Majesty's personal attitude. If there's really something that's hard to say, and he's threatened by external forces, I'll hand over a portion of my power to him, to alleviate the urgent situation. One of the purposes of the Nine Heavens Dictum's concealment is to ensure the empire of Yutong's peace and prosperity. Since there's evil at work, how can I sit back and do nothing? At that time, I had even planned that if the royal family was truly heartless and intended to wipe out the legend of the Nine Supremes with their imperial power, I would abandon all the forces in the light and focus on developing the forces in the dark to overturn this world and create chaos. However, when I met His Majesty's attitude was very strange. Yunyang cut him off and asked, "Strange? How strange?" Chapter 1429. It had to be said that Shui Wuyin's plan was both offensive and defensive. He had considered everything and was thorough. It could be said to be the safest plan. Disregarding his own ability, even if it was Yin Yang's doing, it would be the same. Whether the royals were good or bad, whether they were ambitious or had their own difficulties, they were still the most powerful force in the world. Of course, one had to be fully prepared when meeting them. As for planning to overturn the world and overthrow the royals, it might be treacherous to old Marshal Qiu and the others, but Shui Wuyin did not have so many concerns. Only Supreme Wind and Supreme Cloud were worthy of his wholehearted loyalty. There had never been a Yutong royalty. If the royals were unworthy, why not rebuild the universe and reclaim the world? Shui Wuyin recalled the scene and said slowly, "His Majesty said then that as long as one has the heart to serve the country, one is a hero whether in the imperial court or in the wilderness, and one is a good man of Yutong." It sounded like a compliment, but upon closer inspection, one had to admit that there was a deeper meaning to it. You have already suppressed the Nine Supremes' worshippers, and now you are telling the Nine Supremes' subordinate, the Nine Heavens' dictum owner, that you are a good man of Yutong to serve the country? Yun Yang asked thoughtfully. Was there anything unusual about His Majesty's expression then? Shui Wuyin answered. There was nothing unusual. He just looked very tired. We didn't manage to achieve anything in our exchange. He didn't mention anything about the Nine Heavens dictum, so of course I wouldn't have taken the initiative. Yun Yang said faintly. Since you went as the Nine Supremes' master, I believe the Emperor knows the purpose of your trip. You went to hand over the authority. He must have thought of this. But it's because he thought of it that he didn't mention it. Isn't it strange? Yes, it is indeed strange. Not only did he not mention the Nine Heavens dictum, he even comforted me by saying that the Nine Supremes' reputation is only a battle between the celestial and imperial authority, and has nothing to do with specific people or things. He asked me to do my own thing, and not worry too much. These words don't seem to be unusual at first glance, but they are commendable and frightening to think about. Yun Yang nodded in agreement and said with a chuckle, That's right. The Nine Supremes had already been cursing the world for being worse than dog sh*t. As the ruler of the world, he spoke of the battle between divine authority and imperial authority so easily, yet he did nothing when faced with the important person in charge of the divine authority. This itself is already suspicious. There's also the last sentence he said. Just focus on your own matters and don't worry too much. It's obvious that he wants me to follow the Nine Supremes' Lord's instructions and preserve this force for future use, said Shui Wuyin. That's right, Yun Yang said. And then, Shui Wuyin chuckled humorlessly. I felt that it was strange. Since it was strange, there must be a reason, and it couldn't be anything good. Knowing that something was amiss, I dared not stay any longer. I bade farewell at once, and left the palace's territory swiftly. I wanted to hide the Nine Heavens dictum further when I returned, but you know me, boss. I was born with a sharp spiritual sense. It was as if my heart was shrouded in a layer of haze, feeling that something was amiss everywhere. It felt like I was being followed, but I couldn't sense the other party's presence no matter how hard I tried. Yun Yang nodded slowly. Although Shui Wuyin's cultivation base was not unparalleled in this world, he was still one of the top few. How could he not notice the stalker? At that time, I lingered outside for a whole month. I went in countless circles and executed countless escape methods. However, the sense of danger in my heart never subsided. It was like maggots in my bones, hard to remove. In the end, I had no choice but to use our secret order to order the people here to evacuate, leaving only an empty room and cutting off contact forever until I summoned them again. After a few days, the other party seemed to have lost his patience and attacked me directly. A man dressed in black like a ghost appeared. No matter how I attacked, I couldn't hurt him. Within a few moves, I was severely injured by his counterattack. Severely injured, I fled immediately. On the surface, it looked like I had escaped by a hair's breadth. But how could I not know that the reason the other party didn't capture me in one go was only because he wanted to use my fluke mentality of escaping to find our lair? That's why I came all the way back. When I arrived here, I activated the mechanism at once to blow up the entire building and escaped into the underground river. However, the person's ability was truly astonishing. Although it was only the lingering force of his final furious strike, it still shattered the lower half of my body. Shui Wuyin sighed and said shamefully, It's really embarrassing to talk about this. I've always prided myself on having the most powerful intelligence network in the world, but I couldn't find out anything about the other party's background. It was only the first exchange of blows, and I was utterly defeated. Yun Yang said faintly, What's there to be ashamed of? The other party's martial skill is much higher than yours. He's meticulous and patient. What's there to be surprised about? You can still struggle and survive until now under this person's manipulation. You're the one who can do what others can't. It's truly amazing. If so, the royal family has already been threatened a few years ago. Yin Yang frowned. I'm thinking, if I go to see Bao, Will I be noticed by this person who's manipulating the situation? What kind of existence was the mastermind behind all this? What is his background? What is his origin? What is his background? What is his stance? Yin Yang mumbled to himself. With boss's strength, even if the other party has some ability, it won't be enough for you, will it? Shui Wuyin said uncertainly. With his boss's current power that could destroy the world with a wave of his hand, what else would he have to be afraid of? If it's an obvious force, I'm not afraid of anything. Yin Yang said in a low voice. The only thing I'm worried about is those peculiar forces, like some strange forces of the soul. When Yin Yang was searching the continent with his deific consciousness, he had chanced upon a grayish force. It seemed to be the force of the soul, but upon closer inspection and analysis, it felt mysterious and peculiar. With the power of his deific consciousness now, he only needed to use more than half of it to sweep through the world with the force of a hurricane, and he could turn the entire continent upside down, destabilizing its foundations. However, even with such a level of mental strength, he still could not lock onto the eerie, gloomy force that was like a deathly gray. Yin Yang was sure that this force was the most abundant in Tiantang City, but there were many strands and strands of it scattered all over the world. At least, Yin Yang could not be sure if the remaining forces would rise again if he were to destroy these in Tiantang City. After all, he could not stay in Tianxian continent for too long. Furthermore, Yin Yang was very suspicious of one thing. Would these things exist around the little emperor as well? What Yin Yang could think of, Shui Wuyin had obviously thought of it as well. He furrowed his brows and said, Boss's thinking is correct. If we want to solve this matter, it seems that boss can do it as soon as he appears. However, if we want to truly eliminate all future troubles, we really need to plan carefully. No matter what, boss can't not meet the little emperor. Shui Wuyin said seriously. Yin Yang sighed and said, Wuyin, do you know that the person I don't want to see the most this time is Bao? He said softly. There's no doubt that there's a mastermind behind this. It's understandable that the royal family has been coerced. All of this is out of helplessness, it's also within reason. However, there's one thing that can't be denied. Bao is now Yutong's emperor. He's no longer the Bao of the past. This is especially important. Yin Yang, who had temporarily shaken off the gloom of Yin Xiaoyao's death, was still angry about one thing. The old Emperor Yupeza had given his all and sacrificed everything for the empire. Even at the end of his life, he had still endured humiliation and suffered in order to keep hope alive. Even if he had done something outrageous, it was still understandable. This was because his primary identity was the emperor. Whether it was his imperial heart or his great talent, the sacrifice and price he had paid would only move one's heart. It was his painstaking efforts that had ultimately protected the imperial court's backbone and all his old brothers. Too many living forces. But what he had sacrificed was the lives of his brothers and himself. Therefore, the old emperor's greatness was admirable and moving. Even Yin Yang, who found it hard to forgive the old emperor for sacrificing his own father, could not bring himself to hate him if he were to be honest. Even when he was cold-blooded and heartless, even when he was ruthless and heartless, he was still worthy of being a hero of his generation, a proud emperor. However, another subtle change was taking place right before his eyes. The reality now was that Yu Qingquan had become the emperor. It was unknown whether it was out of his own will, or if he had followed the old emperor's instructions strictly and sacrificed Yun Xiaoyao. This was an outcome that Yin Yang could not accept. Sometimes, Yin Yang would ask himself, an emperor who had gone to such lengths to pacify the world, such painstaking efforts, such humiliation, and such an outcome that had long been decided, why did he view him as an ingrate who was worse than a pig or a dog when the executor was changed? Yin Yang pondered over it, but he could not let it go. Even as wise as he was, he still found it hard to understand. He could not help but tell Shui Wuyin about his troubled thoughts, hoping to receive a different kind of explanation. Shui Wuyin kept quiet for a while and said faintly, "This can't be helped. Bao can only change in this direction when he sits on the throne. I think that even if there are changes now, the final development will still be the same. It's just that the cycle will be longer." Because he's the emperor, he should rule the world. His words are the law and no one can stop him. Shui Wuyin sucked in a deep breath and said, "Boss, you have to let go of this." Yin Yang's expression was indifferent as he said faintly, "How can I not understand what you're thinking? I understand, but I just can't accept it." He stood up and stood beside the underground water, listening to the surging waves. He stood with his arms behind his back and said faintly, "This has nothing to do with rationality or rationality. It's only because Bao is the son of my eldest brother and fourth sister. He wants to be a qualified emperor, and I'm happy to see that happen. However, if he wants to step on his own people's corpses to achieve his path as an emperor, I won't accept it." Shui Wuyin sighed softly. The path of an emperor has always been based on mountains of corpses and seas of blood. How can there be an exception? If a part of the path of an emperor that is paved with mountains of corpses and seas of blood is affection, kindness, conscience, brothers and family, then this path of an emperor is not worth it. Yin Yang's brows moved as his voice grew calmer, but the underlying tone was eerie, sending chills down one's spine. "Let's go out first." Shui Wuyin obviously had no intention to argue. He forced a smile and said, "I've been struggling for more than a year and a half down there. I can't even wait to take a breath of fresh air now." Yin Yang stared at Shui Wuyin for a moment, before a smile finally appeared on his face. He said, "All right, today is the day you've seen the light of day again. It's time to celebrate." He knew that Shui Wuyin's point of view on this matter was different from his, but he understood what he was thinking. That was why he had avoided the question. To Shui Wuyin, what Yu Qianquan did was normal and correct. If he did not do so, he would not be a qualified emperor. This was a difference in perception. In spite of this, it did not affect the relationship between the two of them. "Celebrate. I don't look forward to it so much. I'm afraid I'll be entangled once I go." Shui Wuyin's eyes glinted with a hint of gloating anticipation. "That fellow values me very much, or perhaps he doesn't believe that I've died just like that. He's searched for a long time with his spiritual energy. If I didn't have the 9 heavens dictum with me, I'm afraid I would have been killed by him long ago, or tortured to extract a confession. No matter what, it won't end well for me. I wonder what expression that fellow will have when he sees me again, and finds out that I have boss by my side. Compared to celebrating, I'm looking forward to that scene more." Yin Yang chuckled. "What's there to look forward to? You'll see it very soon. Right now, let's go." "Ha ha ha." Shui Wuyin guffawed overjoyed. He had the intention of turning from a slave to a master. Following by Yin Yang's side, Shui Wuyin could only feel himself floating like a cloud. The thick layer of soil before him did not seem to exist, as they floated up without any resistance. It was as if they had not encountered anything along the way. It was a thick layer of soil, rocks, and stratum, but all the obstacles were like air, as if they did not exist. Shui Wuyin even happened to discover a gemstone on the ground. When he tried to touch it, he actually managed to grab it in his hand and hold it in his palm. This feeling is really amazing. The ground where the 9 heavens dictum's headquarters used to be was a mess. Before my accident, I've already ordered everyone to hide where they are. Even I can't wake them up. No one, no matter what, even if the sky falls, they won't come out. In other words, if it wasn't for the reactivation of the 9 heavens dictum, these people would no longer be the 9 supreme subordinates. Shui Wuyin sighed as he looked at the headquarters that had been destroyed. If it had been before, with the headquarters destroyed and the medallion destroyed, the medallion in Shui Wuyin's hand would have lost its function. Even the most basic information could not be sent out. Now that Yin Yang was back, and the main medallion had activated the medallion, everything was different. Yin Yang had taken the 9 heavens dictum's main medallion away that day as a token of remembrance. After all, the medallion had all the functions of the main medallion. It would only lose its effect if it had shut itself off. However, Shui Wuyin had shut the medallion himself. If it were not for Yin Yang's return, the 9 supreme subordinates would really have been wiped out. Everything had been a stroke of luck. In light of this, Yin Yang had made another medallion that he could carry with him, and passed it to Shui Wuyin, who treated it like a treasure. Other than having all the functions of the original medallion, this medallion can also nourish one's body and assist in cultivation. It also has the magical effect of being immune to poison and evil. This medallion is connected to your soul. No one can use it through you. Yin Yang's explanation made Shui Wuyin even more delighted. Shui Wuyin had already made it clear that he was not interested in cultivation and would probably not ascend to the bound of universe. Yin Yang had made this new nine heavens dictum with the intention of giving his brother a protective talisman. With the new medallion in his hands, Shui Wuyin did not immediately order for manpower to be gathered. Instead, he stared at Yin Yang. They can't be of any help in a battle of this level. Yin Yang nodded in agreement and gestured for Shui Wuyin to begin his performance. Let the culprit take the bait. Shui Wuyin understood Yin Yang's intention and moved immediately. His aura exuded abruptly as he began to focus on cultivation. With the new bottles of medicinal pills that Yin Yang had given him, and the protection of a deity like Yin Yang, Shui Wuyin could, of course, be unrestrained and focus on his breakthrough. Yin Yang, on the other hand, sat quietly in a hidden corner of the wall. It was as if he had blended into heaven and earth. No signs of life existed. An hour later, Yin Yang frowned and shifted his attention to the door. At the next moment, the sound of sleeves fluttering could be heard as an eerie voice spoke. Chief Leader Shui, are you finally willing to climb out of your tortoise hole? What are you doing? Are you playing a last-minute breakthrough? Was the previous lesson not enough for you to realize the gap between you and me? Following the voice, a loud boom resounded. The wall in front of Shui Wuyin exploded, as if it had been detonated by a powerful explosive. As smoke and dust filled the air, a black silhouette rushed in and grabbed Shui Wuyin's head with a black right hand. An odd chuckle rang out. Since you've come out, don't. Just as he finished his words, the silhouette stopped abruptly. A horrified expression appeared on his face. The moment he finished speaking, he felt as if the air around him had turned into fine steel and miraculous gold, sealing him inside without leaving a single gap. He could no longer move. He couldn't even speak, move his brows, or even blink his eyes. Ha 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 ha. Shui Wuyin guffawed delightedly. Don't what? Why don't you continue? Where's your arrogance? Where's your arrogance? Let me see how big the gap is. Ha ha ha. The man in black still had his eyesight. He could see that there was a man in purple behind Shui Wuyin. The man's face was hidden behind a cloud of mist, barely discernible. The only thing that could be seen was a pair of gleaming eyes that were staring at him, seemingly unintentionally. Although that person did not open his mouth to speak, the black-clothed man immediately felt that the other party was as unshakable as a high mountain through the chi dynamic between cultivators. The man in black felt as if he had been struck by lightning, his soul almost leaving his body. Yin Yang waved his hand to release the restraint and said faintly, "Who are you? Who's your master?" The man in black cackled. I was wondering why Shui Wuyin was so bold to show himself so brazenly. So it's Lord Supreme Cloud who has returned. He continued with a mocking gaze. Lord Supreme Cloud has returned to the world this time. Don't you feel that things have remained the same, but people have changed? Yin Yang replied faintly. It looks like you're confident that you can escape. How dare you spout such nonsense? The man in black chuckled coldly. In front of Lord Supreme Cloud, who has become an immortal in the upper realm, escaping is but wishful thinking. However, if Lord Supreme Cloud wants anything from me, it's wishful thinking as well. Yin Yang chuckled nonchalantly. I've been guessing who could have caused such a commotion. So it's the remnants of the school of Kismet State's doing. The man in black narrowed his eyes and said, Lord Supreme Cloud is perceptive and observant. As he spoke, a malicious glint shot out of his eyes as he said, I wonder if Lord Supreme Cloud believes it. But we've been waiting for you to descend to the mortal realm. You finally descended today and stepped into the world again. It's gratifying. Our anticipation wasn't in vain. He chuckled eerily. I'll be waiting for you. Before the man's words echoed in the air, his entire body underwent a bizarre change. All the flesh and blood on his face, body turned into green smoke that rose into the air. In just a moment, all the flesh and blood on his body had vanished, revealing only a skull that could still speak. Lord Supreme Cloud, Do you have the ability to capture me now that you've become a god and an immortal? Yun Yang chuckled in amusement. I do. A gust of black smoke billowed from the skull that was left on the man in black. At the same time, the man's remains decayed. The black smoke instantly turned into thousands of strands and dispersed in all directions. Yin Yang chuckled coldly. With a wave of his hand, streaks of golden threads appeared in the air, weaving into a large net from the outside to the inside. Formless and formless, it gathered the dispersed black smoke in one spot once more. Yin Yang waved again, summoning the small ball of black smoke that was restrained by the golden net, and kept it in his hand. He said faintly, "Is this all you've got? A mere art of phantom nether isn't worth mentioning. The school of Kismet State is rather eclectic, collecting even such a demonic art." As he rubbed his hand, a small 3-inch tall man appeared in his palm. The man's features were similar. It was the masked man in black from before. However, the man in black was dumbfounded, looking at Yin Yang like he had seen a ghost. He cried out involuntarily, How did you do it? Didn't you say that I'm a god? A mere art of phantom nether isn't worth mentioning? Yin Yang replied faintly. The soul of the masked man in black was still bewildered. You're a god. Are you for real? But this art of ours is said to be unbreakable by gods and ghosts. Chapter 1430. Yin Yang held the man's soul in his palm leisurely. With his head lowered, he said faintly, Don't be hasty. Think about it slowly. Do you have anything else to say? The man's soul was speechless. Let's start with the appetizer then. Seeing that the soul of the man in black was silent, a blue flame slowly rose from Yin Yang's palm. The soul of the man in black screamed at the top of his lungs. It was an excruciating pain that burned the deepest part of his soul. Right now the phrase burning the soul was right on point. It was a true portrayal, not an exaggeration at all. The flame disappeared abruptly. The man's soul was still wailing as he pleaded. I'll speak. I'll tell you everything you want to know. Yin Yang was unmoved. Think carefully before you speak. I don't like people to brush me off. It's better for you to remember. Before his words echoed in the air, the blue flame burned once more. And this time it lasted longer. The agonizing howl resounded once more. Shui Wuyin, who was known to be cold-hearted and emotionless, broke out in a cold sweat as he watched. Such a method of interrogation was truly a direct hit to the soul. The man had already made it clear that he wanted to speak. Why didn't he let him speak? Did he have to torture him again to feel better? You don't understand. This is a soul. As long as I don't kill him, this soul can exist for a very, very long time. What's the point of tormenting him a little longer? Just treat it as something new. Watch it if you don't believe me. Yin Yang explained seriously. He then retracted the blue flame and sent a gust of air into the soul, allowing the man's damaged soul to recover. When it was 80 to 90% recovered, the blue flame burned once more. After being roasted repeatedly, the man's soul was on the verge of breaking down. Let me speak. I'll tell you everything. It was the blue flames that burned again, and the miserable howls drowned out all other sounds. The black-robed man's soul was crying from the bottom of his heart. He was in so much pain that he didn't want to live. If someone could give him a quick death right now, destroying his body and soul completely, he would definitely thank that person from the bottom of his heart, and thank that person's 18 generations of ancestors. It was really too painful. It was so painful that he wished he was dead. So much pain that I wish I were dead. These 4 words described it very well. Are you going to interrogate me or not? Please ask me. What are you trying to do by torturing me over and over again? After being incinerated by the blue flames for more than 10 times in a row, even though the black-clothed man was a soul body and had the support of an external aura, allowing him to recover and reconstruct himself, the continuous destruction of his spiritual thoughts had turned him into a pile of mud. In the end, he did not even have the strength to howl. He could only stare at Yin Yang with pleading eyes. Can you let me say it, please? Yin Yang looked amiable as he spoke like he was coaxing a child. It looks like you want to speak. Speak then. You only have this one chance. Remember to grasp it and cherish it. The man's soul had already collapsed completely. His soul was trembling so much that he could not even stand. Little did he know that his soul was almost unharmed. The excruciating agony that he had suffered previously had long been planted deep in his soul. How could he forget it even for a moment? Hearing Yin Yang's words, he was so moved that he started crying, as if he had been pardoned. Although the soul did not have tears, the trembling and flattening of his lips made him look extremely pitiful. "I'll speak, I'll tell you everything." Yin Yang continued to be amiable. "Remember to think of your words well. Don't pause during the process. Don't let your eyes move, don't blur. I'm a very paranoid person. Once I'm suspicious, you don't have to continue. Don't worry too much. I'll burn you with this fire 1,000 times at most." Yin Yang smiled and said, 1,000 times. Not more, not less. Believe me, it'll be a proper 1,000 times. The man's soul trembled violently again. It took him a while to calm down before he began to explain. "It's like this." The black-clothed man spoke very quickly. We are the ghostly beasts that the school of Kismet State has nurtured for generations, using the world's providence as the foundation and generations of incense as the source. This time, the legacy of the school of Kismet State has been severed, and the spiritual consciousness of the founding Grandmaster has been revived. Yin Yang frowned. He had indeed been too careless when he had annihilated the school of Kismet State. He had failed to completely eradicate the root of the problem and eliminate the hidden threat. He did not expect that this group of sanctimonious fellows would have such a sinister tactic of nurturing ghostly beasts. Back then, the school of Kismet State's effort to preside over the change of the dynasty was to collect the world's providence and generations of incense, so that the cultivation base of the people in the school could progress faster and pass on their legacy. However, the deeper purpose was to revive the spiritual consciousness of the founding Grandmaster. However, the people in the school of Kismet State didn't know about this deeper purpose. They only knew that there was an altar in the school. Every time they successfully instigated a change of dynasty, they had to worship the ancestors and send all the providence and incense they obtained to the altar. There were many benefits for the people in the school. What they didn't know was that the ultimate purpose of worshipping the providence and incense was for the founding Grandmaster's self-achievement. Once the worshipping was completed, the founding Grandmaster would ascend to sainthood, transcend this heaven and earth, and become a god. The 6 of us were elder ancestors' guards. After we died, our souls didn't perish, accompanying the elder ancestor in the altar. When the elder ancestor attained Tao, we would ascend together. We absorbed a lot of the air that escaped from the worshipping. As time went by, we naturally transformed into ghostly bodies that feared no harm. Yin Yang nodded. There are a total of 6 spiritual ghosts like you? Yes. That elder ancestor of yours didn't gather enough providence power, did he? Yin Yang frowned. How did he revive? Didn't he fail at the last step? When elder ancestor was preparing for this method, he left behind a backup plan to freeze the physical body that still had a certain amount of vitality. His original plan was that if the gathering of providence and incense went smoothly, he would only have to wait for the air of providence to break through the rainbow and merge the soul and flesh, achieving a spotless body and becoming a saint. He would then be able to roam freely between heaven and earth, transcending the mortal realm. However, the school of Kismet State was annihilated, and all the providence and incense power were cut off. Furthermore, due to the school's abrupt destruction, the school's providence that had been accumulated over the years turned into a backlash, causing the elder ancestor's already condensed half-jade-like physical body to decay at once. His tens of thousands of years of planning was ruined in a day. Elder ancestor's physical body was suddenly destroyed, and the power of his primordial spirit was severely damaged as well. However, at the very last moment, he extracted the remaining life force accumulated in his physical body and left the mountain in a fit of rage to come up with a countermeasure. Now that the world is at peace and the 4 seas are united, it should be the time when the nation's providence is at its peak. However, this has also given Elder Ancestor a chance to steal the sky and replace the sun, to steal the earth to mend the sky. As long as Supreme Cloud's incense power is destroyed and the world is restored, He can use the merit of saving the world as his own providence and be reborn. Listening up to this point, Yin Yang had already understood everything. The current bizarre changes were, after all, the result of an old ghost from tens of thousands of years ago, attempting to rise to the top in a single bound and stir up trouble. What's your elder ancestor's whereabouts after he left the mountain? After elder ancestor left the mountain, he dared not act recklessly in fear of Supreme Cloud's return. He had already split into thousands of clones. Only half of them appeared in the mortal realm to carry out the plan, while the rest remained hidden. If Lord Supreme Cloud reappeared, even if Elder Ancestor couldn't defend himself, and was captured or even killed by Lord Supreme Cloud, there would still be half of his soul remaining. He could set it up again after Supreme Cloud has left, and there'll be a day when he makes a comeback. The soul of the black-clothed man spilled everything he knew, afraid that if any of his words were not detailed enough, this Lord Supreme Cloud would be enraged and burn him 1,000 times over. Therefore, how could he care about Elder Ancestor now? He did not even care about his own life and death anymore. He only wished that he would no longer have to suffer the pain. Even if his soul and spirit were to be destroyed, he would be grateful. Yin Yang nodded inwardly. This old ghost was thoughtful and farsighted. No wonder Yin Yang's deific consciousness could not search him thoroughly. He was a cautious person indeed. If he were to use his deific consciousness with all his might, he was confident that he could retrieve all of the old ghost's soul. However, this world was powerless and could easily be destroyed. If he were to use only half of the power that he could currently wield, he would not be able to confirm whether all of the old ghost's soul had been destroyed or not. If he were to miss out on even a single soul, it would be an endless disaster. Yin Yang's thoughts raced as he asked for the first time. So, when your elder ancestor planned to seize this world's providence, the first place he controlled was the palace? Yes. Elder Ancestor knew that it would be difficult to achieve anything if he were to attack from the outside. His remaining vitality was limited, and so was his time. Therefore, he snuck into the palace at once. Although the palace was guarded by the royal providence, Elder Ancestor's deep understanding of the royal providence over the past 10,000 years allowed him to find an opportunity very quickly. During the royal sacrifice, he successfully took control of Yutong's emperor. Then, of course, he forced him to submit. The soul of the black-clothed man revealed everything he knew bit by bit. Whenever he encountered something he did not know or did not understand, he would add at once, "I swear to God that I really don't know anything about this." Little did he know that what he had said was already enough for Yin Yang to understand the entire situation. This situation left Shui Wuyin flabbergasted. After all, these matters had far exceeded the scope of his knowledge. The reason behind this is too complicated. It's not necessarily complicated. Since we've already found out about it, we can act on it. The only troublesome thing now is the half of the soul that this elder ancestor has hidden. These hidden forces are not difficult to destroy, but it's difficult to collect them all. For now, my deific consciousness can detect all the dark auras around and within the palace. It can be guaranteed that nothing will go wrong. Although I can sense the parts outside, I can't guarantee that nothing will go wrong. I think the elder ancestor has already cut off his connection with the other half of the soul before he entered the palace, just in case. This is the trickiest part. Yin Yang sighed softly. If it's only against the soul in the palace, it'll be as easy as lifting a finger. It can be completely eradicated in an instant. However, once it's done, it'll be a clear message of my return. The other half of the force outside will definitely go into hiding. It won't be rare even if it doesn't come out for 100 years. It looks like this elder ancestor knows a lot about me. Shui Wuyin chuckled humorlessly. Of course. After all, the main purpose of this elder ancestor coming out this time is to seize your providence. You're a genuine person who has ascended to immortality. How can he not be on guard? His plan is very simple. If he succeeds this time, he'll succeed. However, if you really come down and destroy his setup, the other half of his force will fall into a long hibernation state to avoid your limelight. You can't stay in the lower realm for too long anyway. I believe to him, he's already waited for 10,000 years. There's no harm in waiting for another chance to rebuild his empire. I have to say that these are the two safest plans. Shui Wuyin smiled. Such a consideration is indeed troublesome. If I were him, I'd probably do the same. No matter what, he has to leave a chance to turn things around. Facing you, it's hard to be assured of victory, no matter what kind of setup he has. If he doesn't leave a way out, once he's defeated, he'll be doomed eternally. Boss, your reputation is too great. Yun Yang chuckled bitterly, looking at the soul of the man in black who was trembling in his palm as he awaited his judgment. I guess your elder ancestor has turned to control the little emperor now. Is it through soul possession? The soul of the man in black answered immediately. Yes, elder ancestor's cultivation base is profound. Even with the little emperor's imperial providence, he can still possess the little emperor for a long time. Other than the noon when the yang qi is at its peak, he has to stay close to him at other times. Yin Yang said in realization. Which means that other than the hour and 45 minutes at noon, you've been monitoring me at all times, not even for a moment? You can say that. What else? Elder ancestor's other clone is possessing the current imperial tutor, the great scholar Zheng Yuanquan. Every 3 days, he enters the palace to lecture the little emperor, teaching him the ways of being a ruler. Shui Wuyin scoffed. Doesn't it feel that possessing someone isn't enough? He actually wants to change his identity to further influence him? Does the little emperor know that Zheng Yuanquan is actually your elder ancestor? Yin Yang asked after some thought. He doesn't necessarily know. Yin Yang said in realization, I see. On one hand, the great scholar lectures and guides the emperor's mind. On the other hand, the old ghost seduces and bewitches the emperor's mind. Both approaches lead the emperor to the path he wishes him to take. A moment later, Yin Yang tossed the soul of the man in black into his deific consciousness and asked Emmy to guard it. Emmy was not allowed to devour him. The man in black's soul was even more terrified now. The one beside him who was restraining him seemed to be even more terrifying, like a natural enemy. What does that disdainful look mean? He did not know how high Emmy's standards were now. The soul of the man in black was only cultivated in the lower realm. How could it be worthy of being devoured by Emmy? Did it look like it was picking up trash? Was it so hungry that it could not be choosy? Boss, it looks like you really have to meet this little emperor. Shui Wuyin said. It's better not to beat the grass to scare the evil. How about this, you go on my behalf? Tell him that I've sent the message back, but I haven't returned in person. It's fine for me to meet him. But aren't I afraid that the old ancestor will possess me? It's fine if he's bent over me. But isn't the risk of being exposed even greater? Yin Yang thought about it and said, It's fine. I'll hide myself with the art of wind cloud manifestation and possess you. That old ghost won't be able to do anything to you. At most, he'll suspect that you're hiding my token. If I act recklessly, I'll be asking for trouble. Although his seal had not been completely lifted, the 4 hours of loosening the seal every day was enough for him to do what he wanted. Brilliant, Shui Wuyin praised. With this, even if we meet that old ghost, it won't be a problem. In the palace, it was the time for the morning assembly. Your Majesty, to the east of Tianxian Cliff, to the north of the wild forest, there's a sudden movement of an earth dragon. 1,000 feet wide and thousands of miles long cliff suddenly appeared on the flat ground. It's so deep that the bottom can't be seen. This crypt appeared almost soundlessly. It's a marvelous sight. Yu Qingquan's expression was dark as he said, Oh, have you sent anyone to investigate? They're still investigating. The specific news hasn't arrived yet. It'll probably take some time. This is the only thing that's true. Yu Qingquan squinted his eyes and said, Understood. Your Majesty, something big has happened to the Xia family. One of the 4 noble families, recently, another official said. What is it? There's been a sudden change in the Xia family. All the men in the family have died within a day. There's no invasion from the outside. It's more like the outbreak of a taboo disease in the family. However, after this incident, the Xia family can no longer be ranked among the 4 noble families of Tianxian. This is strange and puzzling. Yu Qingquan frowned and suddenly snorted, saying, It's just a martial world family. What right do they have to be judged by the imperial court? Since there's no invasion from the outside, and they're all men of the same family, if it's not an outbreak of a taboo disease, what else could it be? Among the generals, an elder who was the leader stepped out and said worriedly, Your Majesty, my son Lin Yunlong has gone missing since a few days ago and there's no sign of him now. Yu Qingquan frowned. His soldiers have all gone missing as well. None of them have returned. Yes. The old general looked worried. A total of 5,000 men and horses have vanished into thin air. Until now, there's no news at all. Yu Qingquan said with a dark face. I understand. After the imperial court was dismissed, Yu Qingquan met with a few officials in the imperial study and instructed them on a few matters before waving them away. He then fell into deep thought. A cloud of gray mist rose from his sleeve as a sinister voice spoke. Your Majesty, it looks like your ninth uncle has returned. I wonder what your Majesty thinks. Yu Qingquan's youthful face turned somber as he said faintly, Even if ninth uncle has returned, he's just a wanderer visiting home. What thoughts can he have? Now that the Nine Supremes' miracles have been wiped out, the legend has become a joke, and its reputation is in tatters. Supreme Wood has returned. How could he not have any thoughts? Yu Qingquan said faintly. Ninth uncle is a wise man. He will naturally understand my actions. He's no longer a person of this world. He should understand the helplessness he feels towards the imperial power. The reputation of the Nine Supremes is too great. It's not a good thing for the royal rule. When ninth uncle is here, he can still intimidate the weak. But if ninth uncle doesn't return, the reputation of the Nine Supremes will only become a tool for those with ulterior motives, a source of great disaster. His youthful face was tinged with sorrow. Nothing will happen if the world is at peace and the world is at peace. However, if there's a time of famine, or if there's any natural or man-made disaster, the hope of miracles and the seeds of hope can't be stopped. The reputation of the Nine Supremes will only become an even more unstable factor. Those with wild ambitions will definitely take advantage of the situation and accuse the king of being immoral, and so on. By then the world will be in chaos, and the people will suffer. The gray shadow said faintly, Your Majesty is far-sighted and far-sighted. Supreme Cloud will definitely understand. Yu Qingquan said faintly, This world belongs to me. Even if ninth uncle returns, nothing will change. That includes all of you. Although you can control my life and death now, you can't change the fact that I'm the ruler of an empire, the ruler of the world. Your Majesty has flattered me. How can this old man control your Majesty? I'm only forced to seek my own way of survival through your Majesty's hand. I dare not hope for more. Once this old man has a place to go, I'll leave at once. Don't worry, your Majesty. Yu Qingquan said coldly. That better be the case. He raised his brows and said, I do hope that when ninth uncle comes to Tianxian again, I can have a heart-to-heart talk with ninth uncle. This world is ruled by imperial power after all, not by divine power. The gray shadow smiled faintly and said, Your Majesty, I wonder if those old officials you've released can understand your good intentions? Yu Qingquan smiled faintly. This isn't important. Whether they understand or not, it's fine. I don't wish for them to understand now. The gray shadow was silent for a long time before he said, Your Majesty, you're already a qualified ruler in terms of the way of an emperor. Yu Qingquan said, Oh, if your Majesty wants to improve further, you'll have to work on the big picture broad-mindedness, the human heart, balance, and the general trend. Yu Qingquan said with a sullen face, Elder Qin, I allowed you to exist mainly because I had no other choice. I've been passive from start to finish, but please don't monitor me like this in the future. I really can't take it anymore. Do you know how many times I've wanted to perish together with you? The gray shadow laughed hoarsely and said, Your Majesty, please don't be angry. This old man will obey. The gray shadow disappeared. Yu Qingquan walked to the window with his hands behind his back and looked at the white clouds in the sky. Suddenly, he stretched out his arms and murmured, My world. This is my world. King's hegemony, ha ha ha. He laughed loudly and said in a low voice, Under the heavens, all land belongs to the king. Those who lead the land are all the king's officials. I want to be an emperor for all eternity. He turned around and sat on the chair. Then he started to focus on reading the memorials. However, after a while he stopped and murmured to himself, "A canyon that's thousands of miles wide suddenly opened? The Xia family's name was suddenly removed? Could it be that ninth uncle has returned? Could it be that ninth uncle has really returned to Tianxian?" Feng Lingtian said. It was still 6,000 words in one. Chapter 1431. Your Majesty, General Cheng requests an audience. Summon. Your Majesty, this old official requests an audience with Your Majesty to introduce an expert to Your Majesty. Expert? Who? I wonder if Your Majesty has heard of the name Shui Wuyin. General Cheng asked. Yu Qingquan's pupils shrunk as he uttered word by word. Shui Wuyin? That's him. The legendary wielder of the Nine Heavens dictum? The actual wielder of the Nine Supremes? Yes. If it weren't for his reputation, how would this humble official dare call himself an expert? Yu Qingquan's gaze was sharp. This Shui Wuyin has disappeared for a long time, and the Nine Heavens dictum has been quiet for a long time as well. Why has he appeared today? Has Minister Cheng asked about his purpose? Shui Wuyin has always been elusive, and can be said to be the most mysterious person in this world. This humble official has only heard of this person's name in the past, and did not know him personally. Even today is the first time we've met. I don't know why he suddenly came to me today, and asked this humble official to introduce Your Majesty. This person's reputation is well known, and the Nine Heavens dictum has contributed a lot to Yutong in the past. This humble official can't refuse his request, and could only bring this person to Your Majesty's side for Your Majesty to decide whether or not to summon this person. General Cheng's heart was in turmoil. If he had not been forced to do so, how would he have been willing to be involved in such a high-level matter? Now, the elders in the imperial court were all in a daze. He had only been a minor character in the imperial court, but now he could be the bridge for the owner of the Nine Heavens dictum. Shui Wuyin had no familiar faces to look for, so he had come to him in the end. If it had been in the past, he would never have had the chance to be involved in such an important matter. However, it was not his wish to be involved in such an important matter. Everyone in the imperial court knew that His Majesty and the Nine Supremes' forces were at odds and had parted ways. Now, this meeting of the century was actually facilitated by an insignificant outsider like him? This also means that you don't know why he wants to see me? Yes, this humble official is ashamed, but I really have no choice. Yu Qingquan thought about it and said, It's all right. Summon Shui Wuyin to the side hall. He murmured, I'd like to see what this Nine Heavens dictum's wielder wants to say to me. General Cheng retreated. A cloud of gray mist emerged from Yu Qingquan's sleeves as he said eerily, Looks like Lord Supreme Cloud has truly descended upon Tianxian once more. Shui Wuyin's trip this time is obviously to set up a vanguard. He laughed strangely and said, Your Majesty, the reinforcements you've been waiting for have finally arrived. But I don't know how happy I am right now. Yu Qingquan frowned and said faintly, If I say, I really don't want ninth uncle to come back, I wonder if Elder Qin will believe me? I right now only use the current plate to bring peace to the world and let the country last for a long time. I don't want to be a child who doesn't grow up in the eyes of others. Yu Qingquan took a deep breath and said, What I want to be is an emperor that will last for 1,000 years and be famous for 10,000 generations. Gray Mist chuckled. Your Majesty is young, but your cultivation of the emperor's mind has already reached the acme of perfection. I'm not afraid that Your Majesty will laugh at me, but I don't dare to believe even half a word that Your Majesty is saying now. Yu Qingquan laughed and said, Why would I need anyone to believe me? Elder Qin is the same, and so is my ninth uncle. He strode out and said, Follow me. The gray mist asked, Your Majesty, are you sure you want this old man to follow? Yu Qingquan said faintly, If Shui Wuyin is sent by ninth uncle, he's also a threat to me. After all, I've annihilated the Nine Supremes' worshippers in the human realm. As the wielder of the Nine Heavens dictum, how can Shui Wuyin not hold a grudge against me? On the contrary, if it wasn't ninth uncle's order, Shui Wuyin would still be here with malicious intent. If you don't come with me, who can guarantee my safety? Your Majesty is right. Your Majesty is thoughtful and far-sighted. The gray mist followed. Yu Qianquan had seen Shui Wuyin before, more than once. Yun Yang was Shui Wuyin's boss, but Shui Wuyin had another boss, Supreme Wind Jilingfeng. Yu Qianquan was both Supreme Cloud and Supreme Wind's eldest brother, Supreme Earth's only son. How could he not think about him, not take care of him, not care about him? However, it was the first time he had seen the Yu Qianquan who had grown up, the Yu Qianquan of today. With a single glance, Shui Wuyin felt as though the world had changed. The tender and obedient child in his memory had long since disappeared without a trace. The one who appeared before Shui Wuyin was a young man who was 7 feet tall. His physique was average, but he was tall and straight. No, he should be a young man. Yu Qianquan sat on the dragon throne, not moving an inch. The corners of his eyes and the tips of his brows were overflowing with a domineering aura. He had the aura of a monarch who had descended upon the world and commanded the 4 seas. Moreover, it was ample. This commoner, Shui Wuyin, greets your Majesty. Shui Wuyin sighed softly in his heart. Just from this first glance, he already knew that Yun Yang was going to be disappointed. This was because the person in front of him had already failed him. Yun Yang would only give him a lower evaluation. This was probably what it meant by, the deeper the love, the more severe the responsibility. Yu Qianquan's expression was indifferent as he raised his hand slightly. Wuyin, rise, he said rather ruefully. I've often heard that the 9 Heavens Dictum Master has been hiding in the dark for a long time, commanding the 9 Heavens Dictum's subordinates, working tirelessly for the Empire of Yutong. You're also Ninth Uncle's close brother, but I've never had the chance to meet you. It's truly regrettable. I've just ascended to the throne, but how can I accept such a grand greeting from Wuyin? His words were polite, but the indifference in his tone was audible to everyone. Calling him Yutong's meritorious subject had set the standpoints of both parties. One was a monarch while the other was a vassal. The difference between the two was obvious. Shui Wuyin replied in an equally indifferent tone. Your Majesty has flattered me. This commoner does not deserve it. By calling him a commoner, he had made his stand clear. I'm a barbarian who doesn't belong to a monarch. You're thinking too much about the so-called vassal relationship. Yu Qianquan said confidently, you deserve it. You'll leave your name in Yutong's history books. History books had always been written by the victors. I'm Yutong's new emperor, my words are the law. If I say you deserve it, then you deserve it. If I say you're Yutong's meritorious subject, then you're Yutong's meritorious subject. Yun Yang's mental energy was attached to Shui Wuyin as he stared at the young emperor before him. Looking at the man's movements that were filled with the aura of a ruler, and the way he spoke that was high and mighty, yet naturally in control of the world, Yin Yang could not help sighing in his heart. This was Yu Qianquan, the emperor of Yutong. He was no longer Bao'er. He was no longer the timid child who had hugged his neck and called him ninth uncle. Everything had changed. The past could not be recovered. The memories of the past could never come back. A pang of pain flashed through Yin Yang's heart. This is the position that your father gave up back then. Now you're sitting on it. Perhaps from the very beginning, when I pushed you onto this path, this ending has been destined. Should I say that I regret it or not? The path of an emperor is not the path of martial arts. I'm destined to be invincible and alone. It's not an ordinary path indeed. Yin Yang sighed in his heart. Yu Qianquan sat on the throne. His attitude had turned amiable as he chatted with Shui Wuyin. Shui Wuyin realized that the young emperor before him was not an ordinary character. From the initial tit-for-tat to the current amiable demeanor, his change in attitude was seamless, showing that he was not a simple-minded person who was eager for quick success. He knew that Shui Wuyin had come with a purpose this time, but he still chatted with Shui Wuyin patiently. Although there were no words of praise or promises, it gave rise to a subtle feeling of familiarity, respect, and trustworthiness. Shui Wuyin was someone who had been playing with politics all year long and had a good grasp of people's hearts. How could he not know that as long as such a feeling was born, The next step in certain matters would naturally give birth to the mentality of a gentleman would die for a bosom friend. This had nothing to do with the throne. It was related to power and influence. It was also a display of personal grace, the so-called charisma of a person. And for an emperor to have such personal charisma, it could be said to be very terrifying. However, being approachable was not necessarily a good word. At least, it was not to Shui Wuyin or Yin Yang. Wuyin, you must have come to see me for something important, am I right? Yu Qingquan was at ease. Your Majesty, this lowly one. Don't be in a hurry to speak. Why don't I make a guess and see if I'm right? Yu Qingquan chuckled and spoke casually like a friend. Just take it as a little game between us. He smiled faintly, a little melancholy. Ever since I've ascended to this position, I haven't had such a chance. Shui Wuyin took a deep breath, suppressing the sense of familiarity that had just arisen. He thought to himself that this fellow was quite skilled indeed. His charisma was extraordinary to be able to influence him, even though he had already made up his mind. Wuyin has been hiding in the dark for a long time, and rarely shows himself. Now that he has come to see me when the world is in an uproar, there are only a few possibilities. One of them is that Wuyin has seen through the treachery of the human heart, and is tired of the world's turmoil. He wants to hand over the power in his hands and vanish from this world. Yu Qingquan chuckled softly and said, Let's talk about this possibility first. Wuyin, ever since my ninth uncle left this realm, and ascended to the upper realm, the royal family has long known that you're in charge of the 9 heavens dictum, including your name. However, I've never sent anyone to interfere with any of your actions, nor have I expressed anything. I've even wanted to see you. I want you to maintain the 9 heavens dictum's flourishing state, when my 9th uncle was still around. I've never even thought of taking back all the power you have. Yu Qingquan said sincerely. Therefore, you don't have to worry about the matter of removing the hidden threat. I still have the magnanimity to do so. Shui Wuyin sighed and said, Your Majesty is magnanimous. Yu Qingquan continued. However, the story of the 9 Supremes, and the destruction of the 9 Supremes has been a hot topic in the world. I believe that you, Wuyin, must have had your own thoughts, be very angry or very sad. I know all of it and I understand. I can only say that you're thinking too much, especially now that Supreme Cloud, whom I've been loyal to, is already an immortal who has ascended to the upper realm. As an immortal brother, can I still be loyal to a mortal emperor? Putting aside the first unreliable reason, the second reason, I'm guessing, is that my 9th uncle couldn't come back for some reason, but he found out about what happened here. So he sent a message back and directed you to pass on the message. Yu Qingquan smiled. So you had to come, Wuyin? Shui Wuyin was speechless. Looks like the second reason doesn't match the reality. Then, there's only the third reason left. My 9th uncle has returned. He's disappointed and even dissatisfied with what I've done. But with his wisdom, it's impossible for him to not see the national crisis caused by his reckless actions. At the same time, there's also my own crisis. He can't just stand by and watch, so he sent you here to check on the situation. Yu Qingquan said casually, Wuyin, which of these 3 reasons do you think I've guessed correctly? Is it the third one? Shui Wuyin smiled and said, Your Majesty's wisdom is unparalleled. I'm speechless and have nothing to say. However, I believe that even if this lowly one doesn't say anything, Your Majesty has already made up your mind. What difference does it make if this lowly one says nothing? Oh, Yu Qingquan asked. Shui Wuyin kept quiet for a bit before he stood up, and took out a thick register from his robe. He handed it over with both hands and said, Your Majesty, this lowly one's main purpose for this trip is, as Your Majesty has said before, the world has just been settled, and the 4 seas have returned to one. The entire world belongs to Yutong. It's indeed inappropriate for this lowly one to hold a power that's different from the official forces. This is a list of all the high-level martial artists under the 9 Supremes dictum, as well as their individual combat power. There are a total of 23,751 people, each of them possessing a cultivation base of Earth Mystic level and above. Your Majesty, please take them in and deal with them as you see fit. Yu Qingquan did not take it but said, Wu, I've been straightforward just now to tell you that since I haven't looked for you, it means that I've trusted you. I believe that you can control this force that's different from the official forces. After all, it's better for Yutong's underground empire to have a force like you to stabilize it. I'm most at ease with Wu controlling the forces in the wild. After all, you're someone chosen by my ninth uncle. You're loyal, and this is the most commendable thing about you. Yu Qingquan's tone was heavy as he stared straight at Shui Wu, enunciating each word clearly. Wu, I believe you. Stay and help me. As the emperor of an empire, it was more than just confiding in one's confidences. It was almost a dead end. If it were any other official, there would only be one way to go: to stay and pledge loyalty. The emperor's dignity had been placed under one's feet. It was only a matter of whether one would give it or not. If one did not, it would be a slap on one's face. The grudge would be formed, and it would be settled. If one gave it, one would stay. What else was there to say? Shui Wu smiled faintly and said, Your Majesty, other than handing over the 9 Supremes' dictum's combat power, this lowly one has come for another matter. Yu Qingquan frowned and asked, What is it? Your Majesty is wise. I'm sure you've guessed it by now. Shui Wu said, Lord Supreme Cloud has asked me to bring a message to your Majesty. Yu Qingquan's eyes lit up. He took a deep breath and said excitedly, Ninth uncle? What did ninth uncle say? Shui Wu answered faintly, Lord Supreme Cloud is asking if his father, King Xiaoyao, is well now. Yu Qingquan's pupil shrunk abruptly, a chilling glint shooting out of his eyes as he stared at Shui Wu's face. The emperor's aura flourished. It was as if he was a completely different person compared to the gentle atmosphere earlier. Chapter 1432. Shui Wu was unruffled as he stared back at him calmly. Yu Qingquan breathed in rapidly and said in a low voice, Ninth uncle only asked this? Shui Wu answered, Yes. Lord Supreme Cloud only asked this one question. There are too few things in this world that can affect Lord Supreme Cloud. This question is already too much. Yu Qingquan closed his eyes. After a long while he said, This world was almost conquered by ninth uncle with his own strength. Didn't he ask anything about this world? Shui Wu said coldly, Your Majesty is right. Yutong has Supreme Cloud and the 9 Supremes help in bringing peace to the world. But how many people in this world still remember Supreme Cloud and the 9 Supremes? What's the point of remembering the heartless people in this world? Is it only to add to one's sadness? Is there anyone in this world who is grateful to Supreme Cloud now? Yu Qingquan was silent for a moment before he said, This is my fault. Shui Wu was speechless, remaining silent for a long while. Yu Qingquan said sadly, Wu, one person's fortune or the fate of the world, which is more important? Shui Wu said faintly, How can this commoner comment on such a grand principle? This commoner is only here to complete a request. When I return, I will have to report to Lord Supreme Cloud about King Xiaoyao's well-being. Yu Qingquan was silent for a moment before he said, I have always hoped that ninth uncle could come to Tianxian again, to lend me a hand. What I don't understand is, can one really be unsentimental after becoming an immortal? Shui Wu did not budge an inch as he said, When has Lord Supreme Cloud ever been unsentimental? He has people and things that he cares about like his father Lord Xiaorao King. Yu Qingquan said, Wu, you are forcing me. Shui Wu said, Why would your Majesty say so? This commoner has made it clear again, and again, that I am only here on Lord Supreme Cloud's request to ask your Majesty a question. How is this an interrogation? May I ask your Majesty, how is King Xiaoyao? Yu Qingquan said with difficulty, King Xiaoyao. His whereabouts are unknown now. Why is his whereabouts unknown? Shui Wu asked. A trace of anger flashed in Yu Qingquan's eyes as he said, The country is in danger, and the mountains and rivers are in turmoil. I had no choice but to use all kinds of methods to lure ninth uncle down to the mortal world, but to no avail. In desperation, King Xiaoyao wanted to use the blood warning method to lure ninth uncle's soul to come to this world again. Shui Wu nodded and said, In other words, the Freedom King is already dead. Yu Qianquan said angrily, King Xiaoyao, for the sake of the millions and millions of people in the world, for the great cause of the dynasty, for the future of the empire, for the future of the world, you sacrificed yourself for the sake of righteousness. Wen, you don't have to put it in such a bad way. This emperor knows that you're uncomfortable, and this emperor isn't feeling good either. However, the welfare of the people in this world is more important than the life and death of an individual. Anyone can tell which is more important. Shui Wuyin replied respectfully, Yes, your majesty is right. Your words are clear and logical. I understand them completely. However, his majesty was mistaken about one thing. King Xiaoyao's life was his life alone. The world that your majesty speaks of is only your majesty's world, not the world of the people. Yu Qianquan's expression darkened slightly. Shui Wuyin's words were harsh, but he was not at the point of losing his temper. He even had a thought in his heart that the world was of course his world. Was there even a need to say it? Of course. This emperor will convey your majesty's reply to Lord Supreme Cloud. However, Lord Supreme Cloud asked if King Xiaoyao was well. I believe the answer he wants is only King Xiaoyao's well-being. If this emperor wishes to answer Lord Supreme Cloud, I will only answer whether King Xiaoyao is well or not. I won't answer anything else, such as the cause of his death. Shui Wuyin said. Perhaps your majesty doesn't know this, but this emperor and Lord Supreme Cloud's communication is limited in words. I can only send 6 words at a time. Just like what your majesty has said, 6 words are obviously not enough to finish. 6 words. Yu Qianquan frowned when he heard the answer. Could it be that ninth uncle really didn't come down? If that's the case, how does Wuyin plan to report this? Of course I'll report it as it is. King Xiaoyao has passed away. That's not appropriate, Yu Qianquan said. Since ninth uncle wants to know the news, why not tell him the truth? Shui Wuyin said, The truth? Would your majesty please state the content clearly? Yu Qianquan said, How about suddenly ambushed and died? Shui Wuyin was dumbfounded, speechless. I asked for 6 words, and you've really given me 6 words. These 6 words made the content of what I wanted to say clear, and I even said almost everything. However, King Xiaoyao's cultivation base was profound, and he had reached the pinnacle of this world, where no one could challenge him. Furthermore, his status was revered, and he held great authority. If he was suddenly ambushed and died, did this not mean that the empire of Yutang had encountered a great calamity? It was obvious that they were trying to lure Yunyang to come to Tianxian again. Why must your majesty make Lord Supreme Cloud step into the mortal realm again? Let's just say these 6 words. There's no need to really submit a memorial anyway. Lord Supreme Cloud is right in front of you. Not only these 6 words, he had heard everything that was said during this exchange without missing a single word. An unprecedented crisis is looming over this land. Yu Qianquan sighed with melancholy. The late emperor was ambushed and poisoned. I only ask for an everlasting achievement, an unparalleled glory as an emperor. And on this basis, I can give you as much scope as you have the ability to display it. As long as it's not a rebellion, I'll let everyone's talents be fully utilized. Even if this person curses me behind my back, I want to use his talents and not his mouth. I'm heartless, but it's because I'm heartless that I'm impartial to each and every official. Wuyin, stay. Shui Wuyin paused at the entrance of the hall. After a long moment of silence, he said faintly, Your Majesty, perhaps you don't know this, but this lowly one was loyal to Lord Supreme Wind back then. We're sworn brothers, brothers of life and death. This lowly one doesn't know the rest of the 9 Supremes, including Lord Supreme Cloud. After Lord Supreme Wind passed away, Lord Supreme Cloud invited me again and again. Coincidentally, both of us have the same wish, which is to avenge Lord Supreme Wind. That's why we're walking the same path, with no regrets. To put it bluntly, Lord Supreme Cloud and I call each other brothers, and we entrust our lives to each other. This lowly one only knows these 2 brothers among the 9 Supremes. The rest of them are not worth mentioning. His voice was tinged with pride. I don't know if your majesty believes it or not, but if I, Shui Wuyin, wanted to be rich and powerful in the officialdom, I could have achieved my wish a dozen years ago. Even if I couldn't rule the world, it wouldn't be difficult for me to get a high position. I, Shui Wuyin, consider myself a lowly one, a commoner. However, Your Majesty, please don't forget that this lowly one is the brother of Supreme Wind and Supreme Cloud, and can also be considered the brother of Supreme Earth and Supreme Water. If this lowly one is fortunate enough to see Your Majesty again, I hope that Your Majesty will address me as uncle. Finishing his words, he strode away. Shui Wuyin could no longer control his temper, and uttered the last part in anger. Yu Qingquan had never called Yin Xiaoyao granduncle since the beginning. Even when he was ambushed and died, he had only addressed him as King Xiaoyao. He is King Xiaoyao and you are the emperor. Does that mean that you are still the senior? Talking about righteousness and sacrifice, your father will talk about human relations and seniority with you. I admire your ability and your breadth of mind, but I look down on your character. You are an emperor, but you are only an emperor. You are no longer human, but I am still human. Shui Wuyin left swiftly, an evaluation forming in his heart. Yu Qingquan was more than enough to be an emperor of a generation. On the surface he was magnanimous, approachable and courteous. But in reality, he was cold and indifferent. He was a hypocrite. Just like what he had said, a heartless man. Normally, an emperor could give up and sacrifice everything for his empire, but he would still want to possess some other things, such as loyalty, kinship, love, and all other beautiful things. What they lost could be called sacrifice, it could be called giving. Such sacrifice and giving were noble, but they were also forced. For example, the empire of Yutong's previous emperor, Yu Qingquan's grandfather, Yu Peiza, had endured humiliation for the sake of Yutong. He had even sacrificed his own life to protect the lives of his old officials. This was what it meant to be a sacrifice. This was the embodiment of camaraderie. However, Yu Qingquan was different. He only had his empire and his imperial power in his eyes. Other than these, he could give up anything else, including kinship, love, and everything else. Yes, it was abandonment. In the eyes of an emperor like Yu Qingquan, as long as the throne and the empire were still there, it did not matter what he had to give up. He would not feel uneasy, he would not feel heartache, and he would not be reluctant to let go. In Yu Peiza's eyes, a minister needed to be capable, virtuous, and loyal. If this minister committed a grave mistake, even if it was a capital offense, he would find a way to let him off the hook and let him live. After all, this official had contributed to Yutong for a significant portion of his life. He would be rewarded for his contributions and punished for his crimes, but there was still room for mercy. In Yu Qingquan's eyes, an official only needed to be capable. It did not matter whether his character was good or bad. Once an official had committed a grave mistake, he would execute him without hesitation. He would not hesitate in the slightest just because this minister had once made great contributions to the empire. You've done a great deed. I'll reward you handsomely. You've committed a grave mistake. I'll punish you heavily. There was no such thing as atoning for a crime with a great deed. In short, he was a person without compassion. This was a fundamental difference, a difference in essence. If Shui Wuyin could see this, so could Yun Yang. Shui Wuyin did not follow anyone on his way back. It seemed like this selfish emperor had not given up on his intention to recruit Shui Wuyin. He was very clear that even though he had obtained the name list, it was still impossible for him to command and control these people, unless he killed all of them. However, it was obviously impossible to kill all of them. As long as one of these people died, the rest would vanish from this world in an instant. This was the power of the Nine Heavens dictum. It was because of this reason that he urgently needed Shui Wuyin to continue controlling the Nine Supreme's forces. It was only until the day when he had nurtured another person who could replace Shui Wuyin that he would dispose of Shui Wuyin mercilessly. Before that, no matter what Shui Wuin's attitude was, he would keep him around. He would even pretend to be lofty, approachable, and harmless. Yu Qingquan, who was in the palace, was reflecting as well. I'm very curious. When Shui Wuyin first came in, during the initial interaction, I could clearly feel that he admired me. What was it that made him suddenly change this admiration into another emotion? Resentment, even anger? Yu Qingquan thought carefully about every word he had said. Gray fog emerged and said, "Indeed, there was a problem with what your majesty said later, but this old man didn't know which one it was. Up until the words Wuyin, I believe you, stay and help me." Shui Wuyin's admiration was still there. However, from this sentence onwards, Shui Wuyin changed the topic, and his attitude took a sudden turn for the worse, out of control. Yu Qingquan recalled, "Is there a problem with this sentence?" Gray fog was perplexed as well. Logically speaking, when a monarch or an emperor said this to his subjects, what he should get the most was the loyalty and wholehearted support from them. But what about Shui Wuyin? Just because he felt that he was the brother of Supreme Wind and Cloud, he deserved the honor of being an emperor's elder? "I think I know." A cold glint flashed across Yu Qingquan's eyes. "What?" Gray fog was still puzzled. Yu Qingquan did not explain further but changed the topic. "Elder Qiao, what do you think Shui Wuyin is here today? Has my ninth uncle returned or not?" Gray fog was equally hesitant about this question. It was difficult to answer. Before Shui Wuyin's arrival, he was almost certain that Supreme Cloud was coming to Tianxian again. Now, however, after Shui Wuyin's arrival, the situation that should have been clear was abnormally shrouded in confusion once again. Especially those 6 words of agreement. It was too harsh. If ninth uncle really comes again, what do you plan to do? Do you have a plan? Yu Qingquan frowned. Gray Mist smiled faintly. "Your Majesty, you've overestimated us, or perhaps you've underestimated your ninth uncle. When Supreme Cloud was in the continent, he was powerful enough to uproot the school of Kismet State, but he wasn't unshakable. With my 10,000 years of cultivation, it's still up in the air who will emerge victorious. But now, even if my ability far surpasses the so-called pinnacle of this world, and my soul form is almost invulnerable, your ninth uncle is someone who has ascended to immortality after all. If Lord Supreme Cloud really comes, I only have less than 5% chance of killing him. The remaining 95% chance is that I'll be killed by him. Neither of us will be injured, nor will we be wary of each other." Gray fog sighed. He had thought about this countless times, so he was not lying. That was what he thought. Although his confidence was pitifully small, he still had that little bit of confidence. Yu Qingquan frowned. "King Xiaoyao is really dead?" "Absolutely," Gray fog replied. "Lin Yunlong and the rest have been dealt with as well." Yu Qingquan heaved a sigh of relief, his gaze complicated. Gray fog asked, "Your Majesty, do you regret it?" Yu Qingquan was silent for a long time before he said, "I've just thrown away the bow after the birds have been killed. There's nothing that can't be sacrificed for the sake of world domination. Some human kinship has only disturbed the source of one's state of mind. What I'm looking forward to now is the battle between you and ninth uncle." Gray fog said solemnly, "This old man will give his all in this battle." Yu Qingquan heaved a long sigh and said, "If you win, what will you do?" "Nothing much. With Supreme Cloud gone, the world will be plunged into chaos once more. I'll continue to stand by your Majesty's side and help you conquer the world once more. My ability far surpasses the 9 Supremes of the past. Your Majesty won't doubt this, will you?" Yu Qingquan nodded slowly. "What if you fail? If this old man fails, of course, I'll be annihilated by Lord Supreme Cloud." Gray fog chuckled bitterly. "What else would I want to do? I don't believe you. With old Qin's foresight, how could he not have a backup plan? That's why I'll be looking forward to your next appearance." Yu Qingquan smiled faintly. "I just don't know if my ninth uncle will really descend to the mortal realm, and what level his ability has reached. Actually, it's very easy to test whether Supreme Cloud has descended or not," Gray fog said. "As long as you drag Mei Wenjian to the execution ground to be beheaded, we'll know whether Supreme Cloud has come or not." "Not bad, that's a good idea." Yu Qingquan seemed to be deep in thought. After Yun Xiaoyao left the residence, Lao Mei was temporarily immobilized by Yun Xiaoyao. However, it was also during this interval that Yu Qingquan brought him to the palace and imprisoned him. From being temporarily immobilized, he was completely immobilized. To Yu Qingquan, sacrificing Lao Mei, A mere butler of the prince's mansion was nothing. If Supreme Cloud returned, he would naturally rescue him. However, if Supreme Cloud did not return, then Lao Mei's death was nothing. Grey Fog felt a little sorry for Yu Qianquan. Your Majesty, you're really decisive. This old man has lived in this world for tens of thousands of years and experienced many dynasties. But there are few who are as decisive as your Majesty. If your ninth uncle really returns, it's hard to imagine what he'll do to you, Yu Qianquan said thoughtfully. At most, he'll just beat me up. Or perhaps there will be other punishments. But no matter what, ninth uncle won't kill me. I'm very sure of this. Grey Fog chuckled coldly. That might not be the case, Yu Qianquan said faintly. I may be a little ruthless, but since I've been in charge, the wealth of the world has quadrupled in these few years. The people have also recovered from the chaos of war, and the population has even increased compared to before the war. Now everyone in the world has food to eat and clothes to wear. Those who are slightly better off will have a scholar among them. They won't be completely illiterate. These are things that the previous emperors have not been able to achieve. Yu Qianquan said, I know that I may have failed as a person, but I think that I'm still qualified to be an emperor. Now that the golden age is coming, and I'm only a teenager, I have a lot of time to push this country to the peak of prosperity. In this country, I can achieve unprecedented achievements, and I can build a great dynasty that no one has ever seen before. For all of this, even if I have to give up something, sacrifice something, or use some means, it will all be worth it. I just need the right to speak. Ninth uncle will understand me, and he will support me. Yu Qianquan's voice was fanatical, but his eyes were calm. He understood all of his plans, and his life was already running wildly on the route of this plan. It was impossible to stop. Grey Fog was a little speechless, looking at Yu Qianquan, who was full of confidence. Even Grey Fog, a 10,000-year-old ghost, had to admit that this was indeed an unprecedented peerless emperor. The achievements he had just mentioned were not false. And this was only the beginning of his reign. If this continued, the world would definitely become a better place. This was something that even Grey Fog figure could not deny. However, the price to obtain all of this was the absolute ruthlessness of an emperor. Just as he had said, all he wanted was merit. Your Majesty, perhaps you don't regret it now, but when you grow old, you will definitely have regrets. Yu Qianquan closed his eyes and said lightly, Who can live without regrets? Feng Lingtian said. This chapter was finished in the afternoon, and he had been revising it. When he had just finished writing, there were only about 4,000 words, but he felt that he had not written it well enough. So he added and polished it, and in the end, he had actually written more than 6,000 words. But he still felt that it was not enough. But there was not enough time. He would publish it first for everyone to comment. Chapter 1433. After they returned, Yin Yang and Shui Wuyin faced each other in silence for a long time. Shui Wuyin stared at Yin Yang for a long time. Shui Wuyin had always known that Yin Yang was an intelligent person. He himself was a resourceful person. However, he had no idea what decision Yin Yang would make this time. Yin Yang had been attached to Shui Wuyin's body, listening to the entire process. He had seen every word that Yu Qianquan had said and done. There was no need for both of them to discuss anything further, as they had already come to a conclusion. This is truly hilarious. Yin Yang sneered, finally speaking in a complicated tone. Shui Wuyin chuckled but still did not comment. Yin Yang then sighed deeply and said softly, Just like what he said, I can't kill him. His birth, his parents, are his trump card to protect himself. I can't do anything about it. This is what my eldest brother didn't get back then. Eldest brother and fourth sister have suffered too much. There's also the credit that no one knows about. Now all of this is what I deserve as their son. But I still feel sad. It's an exhaustion that seeps deep into my bones. It's not worth it. Yin Yang smirked coldly and said, Such a sorrowful thing is right before my eyes. A tragedy that has long been twisted and made use of a great sentiment has fallen before me. I have to face it. It's just a pity and regret. Shui Wuyin smiled faintly. Boss, I understand what you're saying. If this child were Brother Feng's son, I'm afraid I would feel the same as you. However, boss, you can't deny that perhaps His Majesty the old emperor would like to see an heir like this. To him, this situation may not be pleasant, but he won't necessarily be disappointed either. After all, to an emperor, someone like Yu Qianquan is perfect, even exceeding the old emperor's expectations for the empire's heir. Boss, you want him to be a loyal and affectionate emperor, but that may not be good. Yun Yang chuckled and said bitterly, "It's a pity that we don't know what the old emperor is thinking anymore. Perhaps what you said makes sense, but I still feel sad and heartache. It's not about that child, but about eldest brother and fourth sister." Yun Yang paused and said, "Today's meeting, in addition to the confession of the man in black soul, is enough to connect the dots between the beginning and the end of this period of time. Most probably, the founders of the school of Kismet State were unwilling to see their 10,000 years of planning go down the drain. After confirming that I've ascended to the upper realm, they seized the opportunity to take control of the palace. They knew very well that the old emperor wasn't an easy character to deal with. He was an old emperor who had been immersed in scheming his entire life. How could he be manipulated and controlled by them? So the moment they took control of the royal family, they poisoned the old emperor. Although the poison didn't affect the emperor's reputation, he could still linger on with his last breath, but he no longer had the energy to pay attention to national affairs. If this went on, Yutong's power was bound to decline. Unexpectedly, the old emperor was a decisive man, a man who could be cruel to himself. Knowing that he was poisoned, and that his days were numbered, knowing that the school of Kismet State's methods were beyond the realm of this world's ability, and no one could deal with them, he painstakingly came up with a countermeasure to allow Yu Qianquan to ascend to the throne of the crown prince and exercise the power of regent. On the surface, he looked like he was trapped by the poison, unable to do anything. He was only cooperating with the school of Kismet State's actions and lingering on with his last breath. But in reality, he had many actions to protect the old officials and leave them for the future. The school of Kismet State wanted to lure me down and kill me, but the old emperor hoped that I would come down to clean up the mess. From this point, both parties had the same goal. So the destruction of the worshippers and the tainting of the 9 supremes went smoothly. It was also the result of both parties' compromise. No, the school of Kismet State might be happy to have so many old officials leave Yutong. If they want to recreate a chaotic world and leave a backup plan for themselves, there must only be one voice in the imperial court. Also, if they can't destroy me, they can only choose to lie low for now. But the pace of recreating a chaotic world won't stop. Their ultimate goal is to unify the world and obtain providence. If Yutong is always filled with talents, and the continent's famous officials and generals are gathered in one hall, even if there's any chaos, it'll be nothing more than a flip of the hand. Therefore, it's inevitable that the old officials will no longer return to the imperial court. If these people aren't destroyed, the chaotic world will only be a joke. Even if a pig sits on the throne, as long as he doesn't touch these capable officials, these people will be able to protect this empire like an iron bucket, much less a capable emperor. Therefore, these people must die. Just because of this, the old emperor has made his arrangements. He's dictated everything, no longer listening to anyone's opinions and suggestions, intentionally ignoring everyone's dissatisfaction and grievances. The resignation of the Shangguan family of generals is only a start. The chilling act of deposing the Shangguan family of generals, who have shed their blood for Yutong, can only be carried out smoothly. Perhaps, old Mistress Shangguan's resignation was instigated by the old emperor. This is a start. If the Shangguan family of generals is like this, what about the others? I think the old emperor must have been doing other things during that period of time. Not everyone can be chilled. Only those who think they've made great contributions to the country can feel such a chill. Those who sit in their positions without doing anything will never feel chilled. Therefore, the Shangguan family of generals' resignation triggered a chain reaction. Qiu Jianhan and the others retreated at the beginning only to see the emperor's reaction. However, The emperor didn't say anything and approved the memorial immediately. They had no choice but to leave. The old emperor used this method to save these officials, who were supposed to be killed by the school of Kismet state. From the imperial court, he retreated to the martial world. As for the school of Kismet state, the reason they didn't adopt a targeted strategy to hunt down the old officials, who had left the imperial court, was because they were afraid that the old emperor would fight to the death. Once the current situation was reversed, the repercussions would only be longer. Whether the old officials existed or not was a matter of time to them. That's why the old emperor's arrangements for the old officials were so smooth. The school of Kismet state didn't know that all of this was a bet. If I could come back in time, the old officials who had left the imperial court would return immediately, and Yutong's stability could be ensured. Otherwise, everything would turn to dust. What more could I say? I have to say that the old emperor's initial intention was good. It's a pity that this plan was entrusted to the wrong person. Shui Wuyin said with a smile. That's right. The old emperor's plan was already the best solution, when he had no other choice. If Yu Qianquan had gone according to his plan, Yutong would still be Yutong, with a long life to come. However, no matter how the old emperor calculated, he still neglected one thing. Yu Qianquan was still the emperor. He had his own ambitions and plans. The human heart was treacherous. Even if he was close to his grandson, he still couldn't resist the desire for power in the face of the nation's crisis. Yu Qianquan went with the flow and swept those old officials out of the imperial court, according to the old emperor's plan. But he didn't intend to summon them back. One of them came back and the other didn't. That was the fundamental change. For an emperor, the previous subordinates and the previous empire are all other people's. Even if it is passed down from the ancestors, it is not his own. Only the things that he controls, the lands that he controls, are truly his own. Only then will there be no restraints, and only then can he do as he pleases. With these old officials in the imperial court, he'll always be a young emperor. Besides, he has to give face to these people. Unknowingly, there will be too many restraints on what he wants to do. Now that these people are gone, he's the emperor. The word young has been removed. That's why he took advantage of the situation and went with the flow, causing the situation to evolve to the state it is today. He's even working with the school of Kismet state now, wanting to build a millennium-long hegemony of his own, a legend of an emperor. Shui Wuyin's analysis of Yu Qianquan's mentality was meticulous and meticulous. I think he must have used some way to confirm that the school of Kismet state can only obtain fortune through him. In that case, he's not in danger. Even if you come, my lord, with supreme earth and supreme water's relationship, even if you're disappointed, you won't kill him. That's why he can attack and defend at will. No matter who wins or loses, he'll be the victor. He's getting what he wants. Let me put it this way. Up until now, Yu Qianquan is destined to win. No matter how things develop and evolve in the future, Yu Qianquan will be the final and true victor. Even if Lord Supreme Cloud and the school of Kismet state destroy this heaven and earth, this world will still belong to him. He keeps saying that it's for the sake of the country, and that his personal safety is insignificant compared to the world. But in his heart, the world belongs to him, and he can overturn it and destroy it with a single thought. Based on this standpoint, anyone can sacrifice themselves for the country. It's only a process. As long as he's alive and still sitting in this position, everything else doesn't matter. The conversation in the palace continued, as did Yun Yang's. Yun Yang had finally heard the words as well. Push Plum Wenjian out for execution, lure Supreme Cloud out. Crack. Yun Yang clenched the armrest of the armchair he was sitting on and crushed it into pieces. The conversation in the palace continued. When the gray fog was about to leave, Yu Qianquan said faintly, Elder Qin, from tomorrow onwards, Zheng Yuanquan doesn't have to teach me anymore. The gray fog asked, Does your majesty find that old man a little annoying? Yu Qianquan replied faintly, I wouldn't call it annoying. I just feel that Elder Qin can already teach me. Why do I need to use another identity? He continued, What's more, I'm used to having Elder Qin by my side. It makes me even more cautious. Coming with that head, it makes me feel like I'm being treated like a fool. The gray fog chuckled dryly. As your majesty wishes. So your majesty is perceptive enough to know that Zheng Yuanquan is a part of this old man's soul. Yu Qianquan said coldly. How could a reputable scholar of virtue and virtue teach such a heartless way of emperor? What's more, a corresponding incident happened here, right after he started teaching, as if to specifically verify the teaching results. If it's a coincidence, once is already too many. How could it not be clear after a few times? The gray fog chuckled bitterly, a hint of dread appearing in his eyes as he said, Your Majesty, this old man guarantees that as long as this old man's wish is fulfilled, I'll leave immediately. The school of Kismet State will be completely under your Majesty's control, becoming a sharp sword under your Majesty's command. Heavens shall bear witness and dare not go against the vow. The thunderclap came crashing down, signaling the vow's establishment. Yu Qianquan's expression remained unchanged as he said faintly, The school of Kismet State is in the world that I rule. It's mine to begin with. When this ends, no matter who wins or loses, your Majesty will be undefeatable. However, the subsequent policies will surely be different, won't they? The gray fog said after a pause. Elder Qin, just say what you want to say, Yu Qianquan said indifferently. If you wish for long-term peace, those who possess supreme arts and can wreak havoc in the world, your Majesty must not be allowed to live. It's never just a saying that heroes break the law with their martial arts, the gray fog reminded him. I know. A cold glint flashed across Yu Qianquan's eyes as he said faintly, However, everything can only be decided after my ninth uncle has left. It's meaningless to even talk about it now. The gray fog was silent for a moment before he said, So your Majesty has never watched the battle between this old man and Supreme Cloud? Yu Qianquan said indifferently, Do you think you'll win, Elder Qin? The gray fog kept quiet and said, How can this old man be satisfied if I don't fight? I've lived for 10,000 years, and yet I'm not as good as a brat in his early 20s. Who can tolerate that? Yu Qianquan's eyes were filled with mockery. To him, this old fart was only a tool that had coincidentally appeared to help him seize power at the right time. Now this old fart's usefulness had actually been exhausted. If he died, so be it. However, the legacy of the school of Kismet State would form an exclusive force for him in the future. It would be useful for spying on intelligence and monitoring the officials. In addition, it would be even better if he could take over all the forces belonging to the Nine Heavens Dictum. The forces of the martial world would also be under his control. Only then would he be able to truly rule over the world. As for the old fart before him, he must not be allowed to live. So what if he had sworn an oath to heaven? It was better to destroy an existence that was too powerful as soon as possible. It would be best if ninth uncle could kill him. If he can't, I'll feign civility for a while longer. The other has already sworn an oath to heaven, and is harmless to me. I'll always be in an invincible position. This old fart has mentioned again and again about living for 10,000 years. If I really manage to escape death this time, I might as well acknowledge him as the imperial preceptor and keep the art of immortality. Being an emperor of immortality is not a bad idea. But all this, I'll have to wait for you and ninth uncle to fight before I can come to a conclusion. The gray fog was still speaking. Supreme Cloud is undoubtedly powerful, a legend of a generation. His reputation is not undeserved, but it's only been a few years since he ascended. Even if he's improved, it's limited. According to the legends of Supreme Cloud back then, he's still lacking compared to me. Supreme Cloud's most famous technique of transforming into the wind and clouds, leaving no trace behind. This old man has been immersed in this art for 10,000 years. Even if Supreme Cloud is a prodigy, how far can he cultivate? It's just that he hasn't met an opponent that can restrain him in the past. He smiled confidently and said, Your Majesty, aren't you a little too confident in your ninth uncle? A mocking smirk hung at the corners of Yu Qianquan's lips. I look forward to this grand event of the century, an earth-shattering battle. On the other side, Yin Yang sighed once more. He had completely given up. It turned out that Yu Qianquan was well aware of the scholar Zheng Yuanquan. If the school of Kismet state's old fart was said to be the mastermind behind everything that was happening now, it would be more accurate to say that Yu Qianquan was the real mastermind. At the very least, if it was only the old fart who was pushing for it, it would not be so fast. The heart of an emperor is so strange. Yin Yang sighed with his head held high. Could it be that after a person becomes an emperor, such a drastic change would occur? There was a stern look on his face as he called out, "Wu Yin!" Shui Wuyin stood up immediately. This young brother is here. He knew that Yin Yang must have made an important decision for him to speak in such a tone. You know what I'm thinking? I definitely can't kill Yu Qianquan, but I don't want the people I care about to end up in a bad situation. Yin Yang said in a low voice. Therefore, we need to build our own force that's independent of Yutong. We also need to have the capability to intimidate the entire continent. A glint flashed across Shui Wuyin's eyes. He could not be sure if Yin Yang was hinting at him. However, he did not say anything, taking it as a hint from Yin Yang. If he were to say it out loud, and Yin Yang denied it, it would be difficult to proceed. Shui Wuyin lowered his head in silence and said, "Don't worry, boss. It's not difficult. Let's call it the School of Cloud then." Yin Yang said faintly, "I'll provide you with the resources related to this matter. After I leave, you'll be in charge of everything else. I only want the results, not the process." "Yes," replied Shui Wuyin. "You should know what I care about." "Of course I do. Use your brain more," Yin Yang said. Shui Wuyin understood what he was referring to and said, "I will. However, some of the elderly might not be able to hold on much longer. Besides, this matter itself is already a huge blow to them. When things become clear, and they know that the late emperor's painstaking plan has been tampered with, they'll only be even more unable to take it." Yin Yang nodded. "This is a problem, but I'll settle everything before I leave." He stood up and said, "Now that things are clear, there's no more hesitation. It's a piece of cake for me to resolve this matter. After I'm done with this, I'll return to the bound of universe. Now that I've returned to Tianxian, it's a pity that things remain the same but people have changed." Yin Yang said tiredly. However, there was a sense of enlightenment in his heart, a sense of relief. He could finally let go of his worries in this world. From then on, his state of mind was clear. It turned out that what he missed the most and couldn't let go of was this place. Now he could finally let it go. After settling this matter and finding Yin Xiaoyao, he would leave a sea of resources to build a safe force. After settling Qiu Jianhan, the Shangguan family of generals and the rest, there would be nothing else worth worrying about. Including Yu Qianquan, they would never enter his heart again. With Shui Wuyin around, Yu Qianquan could be kept in check. Once the thought came to him, he felt a sudden sense of relief. His cultivation base that had already reached its peak, the barrier of the Saint Realm, had disappeared by more than half. Phew! Yin Yang closed his eyes, feeling sentimental. My life, the overall path has been too smooth. However, things in this world don't go as one wishes. Even when one becomes a god or a saint, how can there be no regrets? This is my last journey in Yutong. That's it. How could Shui Wuyin not understand that Yin Yang was physically and mentally exhausted from extreme disappointment? He nodded and said, "I understand." Yin Yang sighed. From the standpoint of an emperor, perhaps it's not wrong, but from my standpoint, I can't accept it. I can't accept it. Let this matter be as it is. I can only say that Yutong has produced a relatively qualified emperor. But to me, it's like I've raised a rebellious disciple. My teachings are such a failure. The chill in his heart was indescribable. Let's wait and see. The moment this bastard pushes Lao Mei out to be executed will be the moment everything ends. To Yin Yang, finding the gray fog, which was old Qin himself, was the end of the show. As long as he could capture old Qin, Yin Yang had countless ways to make him summon his clones obediently. Yin Yang had endless confidence in this. Even refining it into a soul puppet would be as easy as lifting a finger. However, the one who disappointed him the most was Yu Qianquan. There was regret in his heart, but he had no regrets. Tomorrow's battle will settle the karma. That's right. How can everything go according to one's wishes? I just want to have a clear conscience. This is life. After thinking for a long time, he decided to stop writing. It would be a taboo if he started writing again. Awkward, Amp GT. Chapter 1434. On this day, it was almost noon. Lao Mei's expression was as calm as still water, unruffled as he strode out of the room. Lao Mei was imprisoned in a secret chamber in the palace, not a prison cell, and he was not shackled. Someone came to put the shackles on Lao Mei. Lao Mei's expression was still indifferent. There was nothing strange in his eyes, as he allowed the person to do as he pleased. The person then led him to a carriage. The carriage moved slowly and left the palace. Lao Mei closed his eyes in the carriage, his previous composure gone. The scene of the young Emperor Yu Qingquan coming to speak to him last night flashed before his eyes. Lao Mei, who had prided himself on knowing everything, could not help but smile mockingly. Bao greets Grandfather Mei. I don't deserve it. You're too kind, Grandfather Mei. Bao is here to bid farewell to you. Bid farewell? Have I reached the end of my lifespan? Grandfather Mei, you're thinking too much. This is a plan. It's like this. Grandfather Mei, I have no other choice. This is the situation now. If we don't adapt soon, the world will be in turmoil again, and chaos will return at any moment. Without Ninth Uncle's reappearance, I have no way to deal with it. Right now, the lives of all the civil and military officials in the imperial court are in someone else's hands. The situation is as bad as it is now. If there's no hope of Ninth Uncle's reappearance, then we can only watch helplessly as the world is plunged into chaos again. Grandfather Mei, you've been through this. You should know that the world has only been peaceful for a few years. There are many countries that have the intention of restoring the throne, and there are many ambitious people who want to replace me. One wrong move, and the people will suffer, and the people will fall. However, as long as Ninth Uncle returns to this world, he can conquer the world in Tianxian with a single battle. Grandfather Mei, I have no choice but to do this. Please understand Bao'er's love for the people. At the end of the day, this old man's life is the straw that draws Lord Supreme Cloud back. A bet? If I had a choice, why would I do something that would hurt my own family and delight my enemy? If Ninth Uncle had returned, he would have saved Grandpa Mei immediately. However, if I didn't do this, I wouldn't have been able to deal with the current situation. Sigh, Grandpa Mei. How could I not know that this is the last time I'll see you after I've made my decision? Ninth Uncle has arrived and saved you. But how could he possibly forgive me? He would naturally take you far away. This is indeed the last time I'll see you. Lord Supreme Cloud has come again and saved this old man, never to return to Yutong. While this is the last time I'll see you, if Lord Supreme Cloud doesn't come and this old man dies, it will also be the last time I'll see you, won't it? Grandfather Mei, if Ninth Uncle doesn't come, then it's fate. Everyone's fate is as such. No one is lucky. You're just a step ahead. If you didn't go to such extremes, how could you have triggered the response from the other world? Lao Mei laughed heartily. Well said. Those who want to achieve great things don't bother with trifles. My execution is just a little trick. Whether or not I can fulfill my long-cherished wish, today will be the last time I see you, kid. Either we go to the ends of the earth or the netherworld. Please understand, Bao Grandfather Mei. This old man is about to die. You want me to understand you? Whether Grandfather Mei understands Bao or not, Bao still wants to see Grandfather Mei one last time. Yu Qingquan's face was filled with melancholy. Grandfather Mei, you're the only one left of my past. Lao Mei lifted his head abruptly. Only one left. I'm the only one left of those who once escorted and protected you? They've left, they won't be coming back anymore. Yu Qingquan said sadly. Ever since I ascended the throne as emperor, Bai Yixue and Feng Mafei have brought those people away. Lao Mei frowned and sneered. This old man doesn't believe it. Yu Qingquan sighed. It's true. Lao Mei snorted and said. If Bai Yixue and Feng Mafei wanted to leave, why wouldn't they tell me? Both of them vanished without a word. If it wasn't for your majesty, who else could have erased all the traces? Yu Qingquan stood up. Grandfather Mei, we shall not meet again after today's farewell. Please take care. Lao Mei laughed out loud again. Silence ensued. Even now, as he sat in the carriage heading to the execution ground, Lao Mei could not help but chuckle inwardly when he recalled their meeting yesterday. How hypocritical, how pretentious. You've ordered me to be executed and beheaded in public, yet you've told me to take care of myself. Sitting in the carriage, Lao Mei chuckled coldly. Bower, oh Bower, if Lord Supreme Cloud had known that you'd become like this, I wonder if he would have brought you back to Yutong. I've always heard that the Imperial Palace is the biggest dye vat in the world. Today, I finally witnessed that it's true. Even a pure heart can't withstand the corrosion of this dye vat. Ha. Lao Mei sneered as if there was no one else around him on the way to the execution ground. At this moment, the execution ground was already crowded with people. Mei Wenjian, the steward of the residence of King Yin, had been beheaded. Mei Wenjian had colluded with evil to frame King Yin, causing the latter's whereabouts to be unknown, and his fate unknown. His crimes were heinous, and he was to be executed at noon. Countless people heard the news and flocked over to watch the execution. An evil slave betrayed his master. He should be killed and his bones crushed. It's unforgivable. He's wicked and insane. One look at his ugly face, and you can tell he's not a good person. Kill him! Kill him! The echoing voices of the crowd grew louder and louder. Lao Mei, who was tied up, had his eyes closed as he stood upright on the execution platform. He did not have to open his eyes to confirm, for he could sense that the sun in the sky was slowly moving towards noon, with his warrior's sense of touch. It was already noon. There were still 3/4 of time left before the execution. Perhaps, this would be the last 3/4 of time he had left in this world. Around him, there was a sea of people, their voices boisterous. It was as if everyone was filled with righteous indignation, shouting at the top of their lungs to denounce him for betraying His Highness and framing him as an unjust person. Everyone seemed to be overwhelmed with grief and indignation. This was what it meant to be condemned by the masses. However, Lao Mei did not feel sad, nor did he feel fear. Instead, he only wanted to laugh out loud. Do you know who King Yin is? Do you know King Yin? Do you know the cause and effect of all this? Imperial edict? Ha, King Yin. That's my eldest brother. My eldest brother and I have been risking our lives together since we were young, roaming the world, leading thousands of soldiers, and killing our enemies in a flash. This old man has gone through the brink of death for my eldest brother. My eldest brother was willing to sacrifice his life for me. In the midst of thousands of soldiers and horses, we charged back and forth. In front of Yutong's gates, we fought a bloody battle. Now, I've actually become a traitor and murderer who betrayed my eldest brother. How laughable. How pathetic. Do you know that if my eldest brother wanted me dead, he wouldn't even need to say a word. Just a glance would suffice. On the other hand, if I wanted my eldest brother's life, he would definitely tie himself up and pass the saber to me. If I couldn't bear to do it myself, he would do it himself, cutting off his head and sending it to me. This is the bond between us brothers. What do you all know? Lao Mei stood on the execution platform, suddenly feeling more and more disheartened. The bloody battle, the narrow escape, everything that had happened, the hundreds of scars on his body. What was it for? What was it for? Everyone was responsible for the rise and fall of the world, the sighing of the living, the suffering of the people? Ha. Lao Mei closed his eyes and suddenly laughed at the sky, his laughter growing louder. Ha. It's 12:15. A loud shout rang out. The crowd fell silent. An arrow of command was tossed down from above, followed by an icy command. Behead! It was only one word. The executioner strode forward, the ghost head saber glinting coldly as it pointed at Lao Mei. The executioner reached out and plucked out the death saber from Lao Mei's back, shouting, "You and I have no enmity in the past, no enmity in the present. This is my duty, and I have no choice but to do it. Rest in peace on your way to the netherworld, and may you enjoy riches and glory in your next life." A bowl of strong wine was served to Lao Mei, the decapitation wine, drunk to the netherworld. Lao Mei laughed, his head moving as he knocked the bowl of wine to the ground. Could one still see their original intentions in this demon's world? Was this filthy mortal world still worth remembering? Even if there's a next life, I don't want it anymore. The executioner was unconcerned. He made a living by beheading, and had spent half his life immersed in this art. He had faced too many people who were about to be beheaded, and had seen all kinds of reactions. He poured himself a bowl of strong wine, and drank half of it with a tilt of his head. He then poured the rest of the wine onto the ghost head saber and raised it up high, shouting, "The gates of hell have opened, please be on your way." The ghost head saber whistled as it fell. This was a decisive slash, a slash that severed everything in its path. Just as the decapitation was about to land, a low grunt rang out from afar. The muffled sound could be heard from afar, but it did not seem to be particularly loud, as if someone had made the sound nearby. However, with this sound, the space within 1,000 feet radius of the execution ground suddenly collapsed. The ghost head saber in the executioner's hand was split into two. Then, a faint voice rang out. "Who dares to kill my brother?" It was Yun Xiaoyao's voice. Yun Yang, who was about to make his move, was startled, an inexplicable joy that he could hardly contain rising in his heart. His father was not dead. Before this, Shangguan Lingxiu and Shui Wuyin had comforted Yun Yang many times, and Yun Yang had analyzed the situation thoroughly, trying to tell himself that Yun Xiaoyao was not dead, that he had only disappeared for some reason, that no news was good news, and so on. However, how could Yun Yang not be worried? How could he not miss him? Ever since he vaguely knew that some of the 9 Supreme's elder brothers might not be dead, or even that most of them were not, Yun Yang had subtly invested more of his feelings into Yun Xiaoyao. He was not related to him by blood, but he seemed to be related by blood. Yun Yang was even afraid that if Yun Xiaoyao had really died because of Yu Qingquan, could he really let him go? Now, Yun Xiaoyao had actually reappeared, and appeared in the execution ground to save Lao Mei. It was a blessing from the heavens, making Yun Yang overjoyed. "How dare you, thief!" Just as Yun Xiaoyao's silhouette appeared and his voice rang out, 5 gray silhouettes appeared, tearing through the air from 5 different directions and charging towards Yun Xiaoyao. Then, an unusually intense battle broke out. Yun Xiaoyao let out a long howl. "Whoever wants to kill Mei Wenjian will be Yun Xiaoyao's mortal enemy." The 5 strange enemies did not respond, but launched their attacks in unison, launching a ferocious assault on Yun Xiaoyao. Although Yun Xiaoyao would not be defeated on the spot, he could not spare any time to help Lao Mei. But the fact that he had arrived was already very clear. He had revealed his identity at the first instant. "I am King Xiaoyao. King Xiaoyao is me. I, Yun Xiaoyao, am not dead, so the accusation of Mei Wenjian murdering King Xiaoyao will naturally fall apart." The battle grew more intense, but the battle was also pulled further away. It was obvious that the enemies had forced Yun Xiaoyao far away, as the sounds of the battle grew further and further away from the execution ground. Just then, the executioner on the stage snorted coldly. "How dare a thief impersonate King Xiaoyao with malicious intentions?" After a pause he continued, "Malicious intentions? Wishful thinking. Guards, continue the execution." Right at this moment, whoosh, 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 the originally clear and cloudless sky was suddenly filled with the sound of howling wind. It only took a moment for the wind to howl, growing more and more ferocious. Gradually, it was so strong that the people present could barely open their eyes. Far away, Yu Qingquan and a masked man in black beside him, who were incognito and watching from a higher stand, had a serious look in their eyes. From the start to the ferocity of this gust of wind, it was only a matter of a split second. It was unusual. Someone was obviously making a move. Just as the wind was about to die down, countless clouds surged and rolled in the sky. It was as if a pot had been boiled, and they were gathering in this direction from all directions. North, south, east, and west, white clouds as thick as mountains could be seen. They rolled and surged, growing thicker and more numerous. They rolled and rolled, surging over. As the saying goes, the wind rises and the clouds gather, and the wind sweeps away the clouds. But today, even though the wind was like a dragon, sweeping across the world, the thick white clouds in the sky were completely unaffected by the wind, and continued to pour in from all directions. Everyone instinctively lifted their heads to look at the spectacle. It was a marvelous sight. There was still an azure blue sky in the sky, surrounded by white clouds that resembled a raging sea. Further out, more clouds were surging in, gradually joining the four directions. In the end, only the blue sky above their heads was left. No, even the remaining blue sky was shrinking bit by bit, being devoured and devoured by the sea of clouds. When the white clouds had completely covered the blue sky, the howling wind had reached its peak. When it swept past the ground again, it stopped abruptly. There was no wind at all. Only the white clouds in the sky were still tumbling endlessly. They were like towering mountains that kept piling up in the sky. Down below, the entire execution ground, no, the entire Tiantang city, was dumbfounded, rooted to the spot. This feeling, it was clearly a very familiar feeling. It was so familiar that the long-buried memory was suddenly recalled. The name that had controlled the world's winds and clouds all those years ago was uttered uncontrollably, unable to be suppressed. Lord Supreme Cloud. You're tuning in to the Lee May's Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.